jump into it.
Welcome. This is February 14th, Valentine's Day, so happy Valentine's to everyone out there. We're having a work session, and we're going to begin with a presentation from our airport staff and consultants on the airport terminal. So, Jim, would you introduce yourself and your colleagues for the audience, please?
Yes, certainly will. Happy Valentine's Day to you all and the television audience. My name's Jim Elwood. I'm the airport director here at the Aspen-Picking County Airport. With us at the table today include Tim Malloy of TG Malloy, is one of the local planners, as well as on my left is Scott Carey, who's with J'Aviation, and you've seen Scott and Tim in previous discussions about the airport over the years, and so we're very pleased to have them be part of our team. Today's discussion is going to focus, as you may recall, last week we spent quite a bit of time looking at the rest of the airport, general aviation, some of the other ingredients, and we felt it was important to break these two pieces with the terminal plan being today, just because I think it gives a chance to kind of focus on them. Our next steps will be to kind of merge the concepts and thoughts that you bring forward from us both today and last week's feedback, and we'll give you a more comprehensive plan as we move forward in future discussions. And we've got quite a few things to do yet, obviously, and so we need to keep checking in with you and understanding about your thoughts and opinions so we get those front and center. I think it's really interesting, and as we go into this terminal area discussion, is to kind of think back on when you all came out for tours of the terminal building and you got to see the facility as it sits today and some of its deficiencies, some of the things that the communities liked about it. But I think that both you and the community who took advantage of the tours, we've been giving those for a year or so now too, all come away with similar thoughts, that this building really has some fairly significant issues. It's impacting customer service. It's impacting the employees' ability to produce good quality, high quality customer service. And so I think when you kind of go through these concepts, I think it's important to kind of focus ourselves on where we are today. I'm going to actually take it a step further and kind of draw back. I had a very interesting phone call yesterday from a 40-plus year resident of the community. And his opening question to me was, how can it be that you're losing Frontier Airlines yet you're talking about a new terminal building? And so we chatted about how, the airlines come and go. Frontier did not leave, or isn't planning on leaving in April because of the fact that the Aspen market didn't perform, but because those airplanes are going to be grounded by Frontier for reasons that were internal to their business plan and moving forward. But we've seen very consistent air service over the years. And so we chatted about some of the deficiencies in the building that include, the secured hold space and where you go through security and baggage claim and all those bags that are sometimes left there for folks to gather up after the fact when they've missed their flights or what have you. And his perspective was really curious because he went back to 1956 in his first visit to Aspen. And he came by train because he said we couldn't fly. So, and then he started to kind of recount about the Rocky Mountain Airways and Aspen Airways, and two little buildings on the airport and how, over the years things have evolved. And it was a very kind of powerful moment. I wanted to share it with you because it was a reminder about where we've come and what people have thought about and produced a vision and kept stepping forward. And so I think today what you're going to see is some concepts about how we step forward and think about our airport into the future. And we've worked hard on this presentation, so I hope you find it concise and helpful. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tim.
Should we turn down the lights a little bit?
That would help a little bit, yes. Hopefully everyone's had their coffee and they're perky.
Yeah.
Post-lunch lights are... all right, so the presentation for you today, we're going to go through just a few things in some amount of detail. We're going to begin with a review of the key community input. Quite a number of the slides, the first 6 or 7 slides, you saw last week. We're not going to spend a lot of time on them, but they're just a sort of touchstone for you as well as the viewing audience about the process that led us to where we are today relative to the terminal. I'll begin by discussing the key input from the community, the charrette process, just very briefly, and what we learned from that in terms of the most important key inputs that we received that have guided and directed the refinements to the alternatives that Scott will be presenting. Scott will then present, we have 4 alternatives for you to look at in terms of the terminal area and its surrounding facilities. As well as after looking at the terminal concepts, you asked us to specifically look at the surface parking facility and the parking issue in general, surface versus consolidated parking. So we have a presentation that's devoted specifically to that so we can explain the issues associated with that. And then there's a couple points where we open it for questions and comments, then we'll close with next steps. So beginning with what you'll leave with today. Obviously, we're here to update you on the status of the project to date with respect to the terminal area and give you a summary of those 4 alternatives and an understanding of the next steps. We hope that through that process of explaining to you all the various components of the alternatives and the pros and cons of those, that we'll be able to narrow the alternatives for purposes of evaluating what's best to take forward for further analysis, including the financial analysis. That's our general goal, but we'll leave that in terms of whether you're comfortable doing that. The next slide you see, I'm not going to talk for very much, you've seen this many times, but I just would note that we are in the final alternatives portion of the process, and we are beginning to approach the end of this process so that we can be bringing you a set of documentation and alternatives that you can be comfortable reviewing and approving sometime, hopefully in the April timeframe is what we're shooting for. The concepts that you're about to see have been developed through an extensive process with the community. These are the steps that we've been through: surveys, charrettes, a long list of study committee meetings with broad participation with various interested parties in the community, presentations to yourselves, the City Council. It's been a long and extensive participation from the community. The charrettes were well attended. And we feel we got some great input through our public outreach process that has gone into the refinements that you're about to see. What is this about? What's the airport master plan terminal, or master plan with respect to the terminal about? We're reserving space for potential facility needs, which is critical, particularly at this airport, because we have a very confined buildable envelope. And so it's really important to be careful about how we use the land here, because we not only need to accommodate the facilities that are needed for today's and the forecasted uses that have been forecasted, as well as trying to leave some room for the future. Some key points that we want everyone to keep in mind: the improvements that are going to be made will be based on need. They'll be financially practical. They'll meet the standards, FAA standards, as well as our local standards, and be environmentally appropriate. We're focusing on the landside improvements. The runway system is in place. You heard more discussion last week about the GA facilities. We're really focusing on this aspect, on the terminal aspect of the project, as well as on the GA, about right sizing, not overbuilding, building what is appropriate given the forecasted use. We've gone over the slide last week about what the concerns of the constituents, the community, the sponsor, and there's quite a lot of overlap, particularly in customer experience, and making sure that we understand the consequences of what it is that we are proposing to in terms of the improvements. And I want to remind everybody that the primary goal of the master plan is to provide programming for a safe, operationally efficient facility. That is true not only for GA, but for the terminal area improvements that you're about to see. In terms of right sizing with respect to the terminal, we're talking about a slightly different set of issues than we were with the other rest of the airport presentation that you saw last week. We're talking about the airport's land area. Airspace limitations is important. Community sensitivities in terms of the visual impacts of the airport, in terms of what it feels and looks like as you utilize the facility. And especially positive customer experience. The terminal is really the place where the community is most exposed to how the airport looks, how it functions, how efficient it is, how good we are at our job of providing airline passenger service to our community and to our visitors. Also very important and a major focus of the terminal area is an operationally efficient facility, both from the standpoint of how the facility is arranged in terms of logic for circulation, but also resolving some of those issues that currently exist, lack of space in secure hold room, confusion in the baggage area, making sure that we have the best possible connection to the existing and future transit systems, and making sure that the roadway system really is logical and provides ease of use for the terminal facility. The next three slides that you're going to see in this slide I really only want to point out a couple things. One is that you'll see those two asterisks at Baltic and the BMC West. Those are the access points, and those remain consistent for all the alternatives. If you'll recall, last week in our presentation, we focused primarily on the areas that you see in yellow here on this exhibit. Today we're going to be talking almost exclusively about the area in blue, the terminal area and its associated potential expansion area, which you see labeled here as potential facilities. One other thing I wanted to point out in order to close the loop on a question that Rachel had last week was that there's an area, and Scott, can you point that out, of parking that's occurring sort of in front of the air traffic control tower. Those parking facilities actually were approved. They were done as sort of surrounding a time when we were kind of reconfiguring how the fuel trucks got to the fuel farm facilities, and we needed to do some expansion of the maneuvering room, and in the process of doing that, we took that parking facility through the Community Development Department, and it was approved. The next 3 slides are just a reminder about the constraints that affect the airport, the highway and its setbacks, the GA area, which we talked about extensively last week, and the airfield limitations that create the envelope, which essentially you saw in blue on that prior slide. This is our sandbox within which we can work. So, in terms of what we learned, the key inputs from the community, you can read these, I'm not going to read them all, but I do want to touch on a few of them. We heard that the facility should preserve easy, quaint, welcoming feel, that it was important for the community that this be an easy-to-use airport and that it be appealing. We also heard that aesthetically the terminal should blend into the landscape. There was no desire for this to be an architectural statement, that people were happy with the current facility in terms of its appearance being primarily a landscaped entry with a demure building that's, not overly architecturally a standout. We also learned that there's no attachment to the current terminal building, that the facility, everyone recognizes, has issues and problems. It's been revamped several times. It appears the community felt that its useful life is nearing an end. And then the last 2 points I want to point out, it's important to have ease of connection to transit. This was a main theme in all of our input with the community, and all of the alternatives address access to the existing transit system, and we also tried to keep all of the alternatives flexible for future transit systems. And lastly, we heard from the public that consolidating and parking was preferred, both from the standpoint of the fact that it would make it easier, a shorter distance, walking distance, more convenient for all the users, as well as the fact that it allows us to utilize the airport in the most efficient manner. If we're able to consolidate some areas that are currently used for parking, we can utilize those areas more efficiently for other airport-related uses. So here again, this is a recap of some of the concerns. One of the things I wanted to point out is how well used this airport is. 35 flights a day, over 500,000 people. It's a well-used facility. I also wanted to just note that the current facility, we've undergone some changes with it in terms of improving its ADA compliance, beginning primarily with some exterior improvements. But there are quite a few interior improvements that would still need to be made in order to improve ADA compliance. And of course, those are the kind of things that are going to become important if we look at the reuse alternative. Obviously, all of the new development alternatives would resolve those from the ground up. In terms of vehicle parking capacity and the consolidation issue, there's a few things to keep in mind. One is the walking distance that I mentioned earlier. The second is that consolidating parking is going to be a real advantage in terms of phasing. So I just want you to keep that in mind as you look at the surface parking versus the consolidated parking solutions. And lastly, the most important things about what we've learned. With respect to the apron, that is the aircraft parking area, people were okay with the idea of continuing to experience the outdoors as they board plane and deplane. We heard that quite often in the process. We've also learned that improving the separation of loading passengers and aircraft is important. Right now, the way they currently park, people move between and adjacent to the aircraft. The ability to tug them in is limited here because the grade of the apron the tug drivers are reluctant to manage the aircraft that way. In terms of the terminal, we know about the inbound and outbound. The inbound and outbound passenger flow is a key element. We have a lot of confusion at those entry doors, particularly for people who are both arriving and departing in terms of where baggage claim is and so forth. The TSA requirements, everyone is familiar with how that has affected how the airport functions with people stacking up in the ramped area for security clearance and so forth. And finally, the fact that the technology related to ticketing is changing, and that's going to influence how the terminal area is designed and how space allocation relative to ticketing is done. In terms of parking, just briefly, short-term and long-term parking and having a significantly reduced rate for a long-term parking facility was well received in the community. People like that. They want to keep that. And they understand the need for parking at the airport, but they also believe that its visual impact should be minimized, similar to the way it is today. And lastly, with respect to transit and how it functions.
Yeah, I just want to ask, I guess when you just mentioned that long-term rates would be declining, I may have not keyed in on that bullet point as often before, but it really seems to fly against consolidated parking because of the financing of any sort of consolidated structure. So I don't want to be promising people we're going to have reduced long-term rates here, but if we do any sort of parking structure, underground parking at all, they're going to be paying for it when they park there.
Yes, perhaps I should clarify that what I meant was a differentiation between the short-term and the long-term rate. I didn't mean to imply that the rates would be going down, just that there will be a short-term rate and a long-term rate, so that there will be, regardless of whether it's surface parking or structured parking, we will be able to have a differentiation between the rates.
Thank you.
And then last on the transit issue, obviously it's critical that it be easy to find and use as easy as possible. That we focus as we move into the future on making the transit facilities the easiest, most enjoyable experience for our passengers, and that we accommodate current and future needs. One of the things to consider here is that the number one address in terms of people flying in and out of our airport is a Carbondale address. And currently, there really isn't a great transit solution to get them to the airport in any way other than a vehicle or a taxi or some other rubber-tired source. So it's important for us to consider that going forward.
Tim, could you say that again? The number one, what do you mean by that?
The address of there are more people who fly out of the airport with an address in Carbondale than anywhere else.
Of residents of the valley.
Correct.
And is that even higher than commercial flyers?
Let me clarify that we did a airline ticket issued in the entire valley, and did it by zip codes. And so when you look at the number of folks who are flying in and out of our airport as a relationship to a zip code, our highest concentration of users are part of Carbondale's zip codes.
And those are commercial airline passengers.
Yeah.
This is great news. We can have Garfield County Commissioners help us. Jack?
Yeah, that's a deceiving fact, though, because with 40 plus whatever the actual number is, because sources are important, of second homes in Aspen to Snowmass, etc., this is the destination, and a significant percentage, way above, I'm sure. If you look at those guests, it's hard to track, so you can't get that info. But the guests that are arrive in Snowmass, Aspen, and surrounding area, they're clearly the majority of our guests.
I think that's absolutely a good point, Jack. All we were trying to do is kind of look at a snapshot of tickets sold in the valley and where some of those tickets come from. There's lots of moving parts there, but I think it is a reminder, if nothing else, that we really do service a good segment of the valley as part of our customer service area, and they're part of of what we need to look out for as well.
Well, and really the follow-on point here is that as relates to transit, the current system does not serve the passenger well. And we know we have a significant number of down valley passengers who utilize the airport. So it's important for us to consider that.
Bob has a question.
So I think that's saying that our down valley passengers are underserved, but, I just want to be clear, like what Jack said, that I would say by far the majority of the people leaving the airport are not traveling to Carbondale. They're traveling to a hotel in Aspen or Snowmass. And that's, even though their zip code may be Texas, New York, LA, their transportation need out of the front door of the airport is not down valley, it's to Snowmass or Aspen.
Right, and currently we have the commercial shuttle system, which really augments our transportation system for the airport. And we have something like 60 to 70% of the lodges currently that pick up their guests at the airport. And that's the reason why I think it's successful now. So I just wanted to point out that that's being augmented by private industry.
One last thing. It's unlikely that our transit system will ever serve a majority of our airport guests. I mean, public transportation, not a lodge, van, etc. So no question about it, and that's hugely important. We have to be able to accommodate the need, but I seldom see groups of 5 people with 2 bags and skis and, getting off the bus. Now, I do see, because I'm around AABC a lot, certainly a large number of people crossing the street with a bag and, going to it. So, and how they got there, so drop off at the bus sometimes, or, local.
Okay, so next slide. So this is just a recap of the space projections that are based on the forecasting. And just as a reminder, the forecasting was approved in 2009. We reviewed those numbers this last summer with respect to how they relate to the square footages that we looked at in more detail earlier in the summer. The numbers that you see on this slide are sort of a summary of those. A couple of other points, that the methodology that was used for the forecasting, there were something like 6 or 7 different methodologies that were utilized, and then there was an averaging approach that was done for the forecasting. That it was based on a growth rate in the range of 1.9 to 2%, which is consistent with the Aspen Area Community Plan, and that the 2011 and 2012 actuals show were just about right on target. They're very similar to the forecast numbers. So the numbers that you see on this table are important are the 2017 numbers. These are the design numbers, the numbers that you're going to see in terms of what we were shooting for with the terminal alternatives that you're about to see in Scott's presentation. And just a couple of these that are important. The airline functions, we're talking about a significant increase in that square footage. And you'll recall in your tour, looking behind the airline office, see how many people are sharing those small cubicles. You can understand why there's a significant increase in the square footage for that. Also, non-secure public areas, the hallways and so forth, there are some efficiency concerns there, as well as obviously baggage claim and hold room substantially undersized. In addition to the fact that it's been made more sort of complicated as a result of the fact that you can no longer bring, concessions in, so we're having to devote some space within that small hold room to a small concession facility. So what you're seeing here is a facility that's in the 80,000 square foot, that's functional area. And that means that if you, build this facility as efficiently as possible, 80,000 square feet is about the right size. This is a relatively modest growth from the current facility, which is in the range of 45 to 50,000 square feet.
George?
Tim, on the non-public areas, we've got a a big jump from 1,800 square feet to about 10,000 square feet. Is that mainly baggage and airline offices for the carriers?
Yeah, that's back room and...
Actually, George, non-public areas has to do with area to actually have your mechanical systems in the facility and to actually make the building run. So currently you have air handlers that are compacted into some small areas, and they're also on the roofs. So it leads to more maintenance and other issues for the airport as they move forward. So this actually moves that square foot into the facility and gives room around the actual piece of equipment that they can actually operate. To change the air handlers in the building right now requires a crane to get up over the roof to the middle of the building to actually get down into the area that's stuck between secure hold and the airlines.
And so that's loading dock, storage, maintenance, mechanical, electrical, building systems, and miscellaneous. And the biggest one is mechanical, electrical, and building systems. That's 8,000 of the 10,000 square feet.
So, for example, baggage would fall under, where would that fall under, or just airline
Non-secure.
offices,
Baggage falls under airline functions.
airline functions?
Yes, Rob?
I'm sure that there's a great deal of industry standards that have gone into calculating, one, where our usage is going to be, and two, how that translates to square footage. But my question is, why isn't this presented in a range of things, and specifically in regard to level of service and with our market seasonality? Do we want to build for, use Michael's quote again, the snake swallowing the pig, or do we want to build for, suffer a little during season to be able to, have a reasonable size during the off season that's manageable at a cost level and all of that? And, when we talk about service, that's the seasonality, but when we talk about service, I've been to banquets where they put 12 people around a 60-inch table. I've been at banquets where they put 8 people around a 60-inch table. The same type of analogy can apply to anything in the airport. How many people need to sit down when you're waiting for your plane? Some people can stand. And what's the range that we're looking at here, and how has that been determined into coming up with these specific numbers?
I think there are really 3 answers to that. The first one is the present day need is 65,000 square feet. We didn't, and the 2027 need is closer to 100,000 square feet. We didn't use the 2027 need, we used the middle of the road 2017 need. In addition, all of the terminal concepts that you're going to see are phasable. So we're showing that the purpose of this, remember, is a space allocation. This isn't design. So we're showing you the middle of the road, essentially, with the ability to build up to that amount or to build up to a future amount through phasing. And you'll get more information on that when we go through the next phase of the analysis, which is phasing and financial feasibility.
Yes, Rachel?
Thank you. I have a slightly different question than Rob, but similar, because I agree with you. You don't build a church for Easter Sunday, but on the same time, 2017 seems so close now, and 2027 is only 15 years out. And depending on financing and everything else, I'm not even sure we'd have anything contracted or built or planned to be built at 2017, which is going to make it a real tough go to work with the existing, given how short it falls today. So, my thought was, well, which of these pieces perhaps should be, on the one hand, I understand phasing, but I don't want to be knocking down walls 4 years after they went up, because the secure hold is not large enough or something. And it's one thing if you're stuck standing if you're a healthy person. It's another thing if you're stuck standing with 2 kids, or you've got a broken arm, or back pain, and so, or if your flight's 3 hours delayed. It's one thing if you get in there and you leave in 20 minutes. It's something else if you're sitting around the airport for 3 hours and there's not enough musical chairs to go around. So that was my question, is kind of a little bit of, should the quote range. It sounds like what you're saying is we worked with a range and we settled down to a specific, because you need to for planning purposes. but, I'm kind of wondering whether we should push the range out a little larger on some of these areas.
But I want to clarify that I think that the reason that we selected some numbers was primarily for purposes of illustrating how this works on the ground, with the assumption that in subsequent phases of this process, the issue of exactly what is going to be done, what makes the most sense based on, future need, et cetera, would be refined. Right now, we're saying, here's a terminal building footprint based on, the efficiencies of this alternative. And you can add on to that for purposes of defining how much space we need to reserve for that facility. But we're not to the point where we're deciding you need exactly this amount of square footage. That's a decision for a future date. In fact, I suppose you could argue that it'd be best to look at a slightly larger facility, in as much as you could, if you're going to reserve space, you can always reserve more space and work backwards from that than working forward.
In all the alternatives that you'll see today, you're going to see the layouts based on the 2017 numbers. In those layouts at the same time, if you look, there are fairly reusable areas on either side of, say, the ticketing area. There's a surface lot that could be relocated. There's the end of the concourse that could be extended. So we have looked around the edges, and the layouts are somewhat configured to allow for areas to allow for expansion. If, say, the 2027 actually happens, you have space around the sides of the building specifically to allow you to grow into that area if you need to. But we said, okay, what we've heard is, what we've seen is that the forecast, the employments in the community since the 90s have somewhat cycled. They're on an up cycle and they're going up right now. And 2017 seems like a reasonable place to plan, while we're still looking at protecting the space through 2027, a 20-year window.
Thanks for the clarification.
Yes, Jeff?
As I look at this presentation incomplete, as the meeting part of it is, I immediately try to look at value. And when you look at 2017, I'm having a real problem with what we project and what we get for the costs associated with it. Now, I understand that with phasing, we don't build it all at once. So we're going to have this conversation multiple times while I'm here, at least. But it's just amazing that, to me, there's something missing, and we'll, go through the whole presentation. But, for example, let's ask this question: where do the assumptions on use come from? Remind me. Which then created the need for these kind of square footages. What is the source? We did that in our EIS, or where? Where did they come from?
When you say use, do you mean this?
Well, the number. People drive this, right? People, convenience, operational costs, etc. But to me, the most significant factor here is how many people are we going to have, are we going to serve? Whether, now I'm talking the commercial portion, not GA. How many people are we going to have arriving and departing? To me, that's what need is. It's not a projected or an industry standard about what we need. For example, what we need today at TSA is, whatever their standard is, it's certainly going to have to increase because of the new technology that's going to be in our face, etc. So, what is the source of the generation of this square footage?
Okay. In terms of the projected employments, which is the people, we had a number in 2000. Remember, the forecasting was done 2008, 2009. We had a number of passenger employments in 2008, 222,684. Forecasting for 2012, 17, and 27 were as follows: $229,984 in 2012, $250,452 in 2017. That's the number upon which this middle column that's highlighted in yellow is based. And then in 2027, $295,542. Sorry, Jack, you don't have this slide? This is,
I didn't think so.
We brought this back up.
If you want, I can rip it out and give it to you.
Well, no, I'm not the only one in the room, so it should be provided along the way. Guys like me need to go back and remember sources of information because, again, people are what drive this, departures and arrivals.
And I want to point out, these numbers that were just shared in the 200,000 or so, those are passengers getting on airplanes. So basically, you can double that to account for the total passengers coming and going from the facility, along with meeters and greeters, who actually add up to a pretty decent number as well. So,
Well, again, my bottom line, because we need to get past my question, is I'm going to be looking for value. For example, the cost for parking, and you have multiple scenarios, but under the 2017 projection of numbers, we're spending $50 million plus for an additional 114 spaces. I think that's what I'm reading here. When you subtract 1117 from 1231, it's 114 spaces. So, but all the pieces have to work together. So that's what the rest of the presentation and process is about, I'm sure.
But let me remind you, Jack, that our people who are presenting haven't mentioned any dollar figures. In fact, I haven't heard $1 figure.
We'll be getting to it.
I know, but for you to anticipate what they're doing seems to me premature.
Well, and that's your opinion.
That's precisely what it is, Jack. Thank you for recognizing.
And I had to remind you of that.
No, you didn't have to remind me of it, Jack. I was well aware that I was offering an opinion.
But Michael, you're offering basically what amounts to a criticism of my thought because I happen to have jumped a couple steps ahead. So that's why you got the remark back. Now we can end this now and go on and say maybe both of us were slightly out of order, slightly, whatever, and let's move on.
The fact of the matter is, Jack, that I'm the chairman. I'm not out of order. And I wasn't suggesting that you were out of order. I was just suggesting that our presenters have not mentioned a dollar figure.
Okay, I'll accept that as a fact.
All right, next slide. And actually, by virtue of the discussion that we just had, we've covered almost all of these points. So I'm only going to say one other thing on this slide. And that is that all of the alternatives that you're about to see have been designed to be feasible. And feasible both from the standpoint of what makes sense for the community economically, as well as how the need relates to the growth in passenger use, just as Jack indicated. And the other thing is that last week you saw a presentation about the GA facilities and about the potential for reusing a portion of the area currently being used for roadways and parking areas associated with the terminal, possibly for GA uses, depending on whether or not you were doing a reuse facility or a redevelopment facility. All of the alternatives except the reuse alternative have been designed to work with that space that's made available by virtue of shifting the terminal toward Aspen. And so with that, I think we could pause, take some questions on this portion of the presentation, or since we just had a lot of questions, you may not have any others, and we can move on to Scott's presentation.
Are there any questions for? Yes, Rob.
I have a simple question, and it kind of relates to one thing that Jack said in terms of financing, because I think it's important to have this as a memory in our brain. If and when we get to the financing portion of this, Jim, can you just explain, we're not talking a new tax in Aspen, we're not talking, this is an enterprise fund, this is paid for through airline services, just because financing is a big part of this decision as we move forward, but having it back in our minds as we move forward with looking at scales of things, understanding how that financing happens, I think is crucial. And making sure, I think there are some reporters in the back, that we're not talking about a new tax here or something like that.
Yeah, thank you, Rob. The airport is an enterprise fund, so we generate and continue to generate our needs both operationally and capital through collection of landing fees and other fees that are collected from tenants and such at the airport. As we think about the financing plan and get into that detail in greater extent, what you'll see is likely a combination of what's known as revenue bonds, which are actually borrowed against future revenues that are expected at the airport and our ability to repay. So not unlike your home mortgage where you recognize you expect to have an income and so you borrow against that forecast. The use of federal grants, the FAA grants do not come from people's April 15th taxes that fund these kind of improvements. They come from user fees on airline tickets and air freight sent by airplane and such, along with general aviation fuel sales. We also have a Colorado Aeronautics division in the state of Colorado, which is also what I would consider to be an enterprise fund as well. They collect a certain amount of fuel taxes on aviation fuels, then they turn around and offer grants back to communities. So in aviation, we're a user-based organization or business where people who use the system contribute to the system. Those that don't use the system don't have to. And that's how we would see these pieces all kind of fitting together. I have no doubt that we'll have some choices should we be given direction to go forward in any of these improvements about how those would financially work in greater detail in addition to these financial analyses, because they'll be expected by anyone who wants to be involved in the project. Private funds is another option that may be possible in some of these improvements.
Thank you.
Any other questions before we move on to Scott's part?
At this point, we've talked through what you're going to see and all the different alternatives coming forward. We have 4 alternatives to discuss and look for your feedback on. These are based on discussions through the charrettes and looking at efficiencies and the many different factors that go into trying to lay out the facility, including the number of parking spaces and where the runway is and all those different things. We have them numbered as 1, 2, 3, 4, and I was getting confused trying to figure out what they were, so we added just some short labels to them to try and help. We call alternative 1 simple. We call alternative 2 the T. Alternative 3 is reuse. Alternative 4 is segmented. It's being called segmented because it has the concourse separated from ticketing, separated from baggage. And we'll go through the discussions on each. First one we wanted to show is alternative 1. This was the study committee's alternative, the one that they thought was the most promising. And what it is, it's a compact terminal.
Sal, would you just explain what the study committee is?
Jim, do you want to?
Yeah, the Airport Master Plan Study Committee, it was actually its official title is Advisory Committee, was formed by the Board of County Commissioners. It's a group of 40-plus individuals who agreed to participate in this master plan, spend lots of their personal time for no compensation and barely food and water. And they spent time going over the information from the charrettes. They gave feedback relative to all the concepts that were generated. You may recall we had quite a few concepts to start, and they've been whittled down and refined and polished. And they came forward with some ideas about what they thought were the top vote getters. We didn't look for consensus from that group. What we looked for were opinions and then a indication by doing dot counts to kind of tell us what they thought looked the best to them.
So the study committee was a broad cross-section of the community?
Yes.
And we appointed them as commissioners, we appointed those people to the committee?
Yes. The cross-section included residents from near the airport, further away from the airport, business interests, those with some environmental leanings. we tried very hard, as you may recall in those discussions, to give a very diverse group to be able to keep the thoughts of the community front and center in the process. Additionally, you may know there was an interested parties list, which also is quite extensive, multiple times this group, who attended a lot of the meetings and gave feedback and shared thoughts as well, plus the open houses that you recall we've done with getting general community feedback.
So there was, how many meetings do you think?
There was 5 advisory committee meetings. If memory serves me right, we've had several open houses. We had the charrettes. We've done postings on the website of all the documents and work we've done. You know, one of the cool things about all the meetings is that we use those large sheets of paper, you know, to take notes, and then we had different stations and took comments from all that were interested on those, and we took pictures of those and posted them on the website, so people can look on www.aspenairportplanning.com and they can see all of the raw comments from the very beginning of the project.
So this alternative, the simple alternative, is an alternative that group in particular came up with.
They used a dot count kind of method to suggest this was the better of the choices.
Thank you.
Now, what we're going to, real quick, we'll do orientation. Highway 82. You've got the Baltic Avenue intersection right here. The MC West parcel down here. Your existing terminal is generally going to be on the left side of the picture as we go through all of these alternatives. To go through some of the things you're going to find that are similar with every single option is all of them have a connection for transit in different ways. All of them will have what we call 8 boarding gates with parking for 10 aircraft. Currently there is up to 9 overnights at the airport, so this is giving room for approximately 1 more in that situation. All have some sort of parking. What you're going to see at first is going to be all the consolidated parking with majority of it below grade. In the simple alternative, you have your commercial providers available both on either side of the main entries, and you have pick up and drop off right in front for people that want to drop off their guests or pick up. And you're going to see that fairly consistent through these.
Rob, you have a question?
Just by way of orientation, I'm assuming gray is new hard surfaces.
That is correct.
So,
Yes.
so right now where we're looking at those airplanes on the right are where the existing long-term parking is.
That is correct.
Okay.
This
So
area right here is
It's a new leveling and a new hard surface.
it would be lowering that area, and you'd also have to relocate the car wash facility in order to do that. So the long-term parking lot has to move in order to accommodate the aircraft.
Yes, Jack.
What does this denote here, these extensions in front of the airport?
Jack, those
airplane.
What we did is we laid out all the options to include the ability to have jet bridges if you wish. It is a reservation of space in all the options. You don't have to have them at all. They can be deleted very easily.
Footprint.
Correct.
Thank you.
So it reserves the space, and you can just not put them in.
What's interesting about those jet bridges, just to kind of describe, is they have to meet ADA standards as well. So the floor height of the airplane relative to the floor height of the terminal building, you have to account for enough distance to make sure that they meet ADA. So that's what we were trying to do in a space reservation system.
And have you accounted for, I know in Denver, you've got these bridges, but with these planes, with these 700 planes, you've got your carry-on instant check luggage that, they've got those little elevators in Denver that bring your luggage up. And now in Aspen, you just pick them up on the side of the plane. So obviously that needs to be incorporated into this for a space-saving thing.
Other questions on this alternative? Some of the things that, in terms of we'll walk you through how the traffic flow works, in both, in this situation, you have two-way traffic both at a new intersection down near BMC West and at Baltic. And if you're coming in from the Aspen way, you can turn in early and take the frontage road around and then loop in and drop your passengers off or pick up. If you come in at Baltic, you can loop around, you can leave at BMC West and then head back down Valley, or you can take the frontage road back around depending on where traffic is. These are
On that BMC entrance or exit, I forget in our highway access plan, do we have a stoplight there as a potential down the...
That's a fully controlled intersection.
Fully controlled
yes.
intersection, okay.
Michael?
Yes, Jay.
As far as the connection to transit, is that piece right here, it's a space reservation, but it's not a location, because it can move around, correct?
correct. We can move that around wherever the stops and things end up. We can move that around.
And obviously, there are multiple processes, but I'm concerned by the evolution here of moving it further up Valley because of what it means for what my personal experience is, whether it's AABC or other intersections where people, they won't walk the whole distance oftentimes, and they'll cross the road anyway. And I don't know how to address that. I mean, if they have luggage, well, that's different. But if they're going to meet a friend, they might just... I'm thinking of more, and I've heard these comments from North 40. Gee, it's getting further that way, and so it's something we need to be aware of and not make a final decision, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, part of that location is predicated on the BRT stops, which will also be in line with the pedestrian under or overpass. So that will all flow in together. So that's probably why the planners have designated that as your access point.
And I might be able to address a little bit of that if you don't mind. That's exactly right, George, is that the underpass alignment is driven by two things. The BRT stop moving a little bit farther up Valley, and the underpass did not make sense to put right at the intersection because of the number of utility relocates that would be required there, so that got moved up. And really all they did was flipped the up Valley BRT stop so that you had a better connectivity to the terminal, but it didn't change the pedestrians' walking distance at all because of the location of the underpass wouldn't be any farther down Valley. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I thought the underpass also went further up Valley.
Not as a result, no.
I mean, though we don't have any real plans that we've had presentations on, that's the location. We've conceptually had it in different plans.
Correct, and a lot of that has to do is you'll see it with ADA runouts and such, but they're planning to where we think the best location for that underpass is going to be.
And from the standpoint of the terminal, the important one is that to note is that it's not going further down Valley. Because further down Valley gets it further from, a terminal redevelopment concept, which is, for all other reasons, makes sense to move further up Valley. If it moves further up Valley, it's better for, a redevelopment alternative.
Well, and because redevelopment, if under the scenario that we totally build new, speaks for itself. You can operate while you're building new. Yeah, okay, thanks.
Any other questions on this alternative?
Well, I'll just point this out as we go to the other alternatives. In this one, you seem to have really allocated the different drop-off and pickup areas for bus parking and, hotel shuttle vans and everything like that. And you didn't seem to do that in any of the other alternatives. I was kind of curious.
We can explain that. Alternative 2 we call the T, based on how it's shaped. Pretty simple. I'm a simple person. Same thing. We've got enough parking, aircraft parking for 10. You've got the consolidated parking is actually has to be split into two structures. And in this concept, the way that the flow of parking is that one side is for the public, passenger pickup and drop-off, and the other side is for commercials and rental cars. A little more complicated. The other thing that goes into this is that this is actually a two-story system. So you're looking at the second level here, where you're seeing surface, and you're seeing a couple of the lots here. Well, some of those lots, Rachel, are actually buried in the garage right below. In that case, so this is, you've got a park and wait here up on the top surface for people. So you're fairly close. It's works pretty well. All of the ticketing and baggage are out this way. One of the advantages to this is that it moves. One thing we heard was move the passenger closer to the Highway 2 corridor for transit. That's one thing that this does do. And you get rid of your bags, and then you walk to the concourse versus having to walk and then get rid of your bags. So that's something, a good piece about this. This is the start of, Tim talked about functional square footage. The simple option is the simplest and most compact way to get 80,000 functional square feet. When you go to this option, you have more circulation space, and you have to move bags further. That adds square footage. So the functional is around 80,000 square feet. This actually is 100,000 square feet in order to get 80,000 square feet of functional area.
Maybe Jim, this is a question for you, but do you have any idea, just like percentage-wise, the number of people who use curbside and how that trend is going, looking at our airport and perhaps even looking compared to like DIA?
Our visitors, in part because we've got the shuttle system from the hotels and such, a very, very high percentage of our customers, much higher than you would expect at a DIA, for example, use curbside. And, it's the locals who tend to use the parking lots, and even they tend to pull up front if they're traveling with somebody else, drop their gear off, and they proceed to park their car and meet up with their traveling partners inside. So I don't have specific numbers, George, to give you breakdowns on that, but it is certainly higher than some other airports that come to mind.
Yeah, because I asked that because that would address perhaps one of those concerns, Scott, in terms of people having to haul their luggage a little further from the SIPO, the first scenario, to the T. But if more and more people are using curbside, that addresses that issue.
One of the challenges with curbside is that there's a certain amount of safety issues that go with that, and people are moving around, cars moving around. And so, when we were discussing this with the community, there was some positive feelings about how you could really shorten that distance between how long people had to have their bags, how could they safely get them in the hands of the TSA if it's a check bag or whatever.
Again, this option, one thing you could do for drop-off and pickup is you can actually have the functions underneath cover on this side for the commercial operators. They can drop off right here in front, and they'd be undercover as they're letting their passengers off or picking up, whichever is the choice. That's another advantage to this type of setup.
Jack?
Does this denote the number of spaces in the numbers projections? The 4 levels, I guess we call it here?
Yes. So.
Okay, and what does this space here represent? Just open space?
I'm sorry, Jack. This square
Yeah.
here and this square here are the 2 parking garages that go down multiple levels. And the areas that you see on top are the only areas that are visible from the surface.
Okay, so that's the only surface parking.
Correct.
So then therefore you're saying this space and this space times 2 doesn't add up, it's all of this is
All of that
required.
is required.
Thank you.
And maybe you could back up and show how that looks on.
Yeah, so
one.
in this case, the way it works is you go into the parking garage and you're actually going into the side. This is actually this is at above grade in this area. And then we extend out as far as we can underground out in this area. So you have 2 bays across through here underneath this cover, and then you have 2 more bays as you start working down. So it doubles its width as it goes down. So in this, you enter here, you go down a corkscrew to go down to the lower levels. You come out, you come back up, and you come back out.
Thank you. Yes, Ron?
In regard to the terminal buildings, these are all, at this point, planned as single-level buildings?
No.
Okay, so if you could talk about the three-dimensional aspect of these designs as you go through them, just like you did with the parking garage.
So we can do, if we go back to, in this case, this is essentially a 2-level. You come in on a ground level in the front, and you have a kind of back of house that's back here underneath the concourse. That's where the airlines are and the places you never see in the airport as a public citizen. And that move your bags and all the different security items that happen back there. You then transfer up to the concourse level. There's a significant grade adjustment on this side as it kind of dives off to the highway. So this somewhat is like a garden level basement going up to the next level is essentially what it is. And that kind of theme is carried in each one of these in different ways. Does that help with the
it does help.
Okay. When you go into the T, this is essentially 2 floors all the way through, with the whole bottom floor being used for the non-public areas, moving the bags, the airlines, mechanical systems, or at least a decent bit of the bottom floor is. And you can this can be configured a bunch of ways. You could have ticketing on top, and you can have baggage on the bottom. You can flip those. It's all dependent on what ends up coming out of the preferences for the community, with the concourse being the main area that's on that second level. Any questions on?
I think it's important, if I might inject here, to talk about what happens on the area where the aircraft are parked. When those of you that went on the tour and the listening and viewing audience that went on the tours recognize that ramp currently slopes very severely toward the terminal building. That no longer meets any kind of real code. It doesn't allow for airplanes to nose in the way they're described here on this drawing. It's resulted in several floods of the terminal building over the years as well, but we're going to have to tilt that ramp up as it relates to Highway 82 and that elevation. So we'll have to rebuild all of that air carrier apron as part of work we have going forward, regardless of the plans, actually. So just kind of a reminder about that. We're going to then have to account for that grade shift as it connects into the terminal building and those floor elevations. So that may be difficult to describe verbally here, but I think those of you that have seen it, I continue to make the offer that anyone who'd like to come to the airport for a tour is welcome to do so and see that firsthand.
Cindy?
Jim, or whoever, can I ask a question about how the pedestrian walkway connects with the terminal? It looks like you have to go outside and make that connection potentially that way. And at one point, I think we saw an angled T where maybe that would have connected a little bit better to the pedestrian walkway to maybe get people a little bit more familiar with.
That's definitely something that could happen. You could actually shift the whole the sphere.
Yeah.
This whole sphere could shift one way or the other to make that a more a simpler connection to transit. That could definitely happen. What that does is makes the concourse walk longer. So it's a choice that can be made. It's also possible to shift the entire terminal. That factors into use of the space coming down into this area. So I mean, there's those competing what do you want to call them?
I'm sorry,
Issues, yes, thank you. Competing issues that, one or the other. In this case, the way this can work is if this is an underpass, you actually, the garage doesn't extend out. So you're on the surface. We talked about using a covered walkway going out, but you have to cross a road. But you can go out through the covered area of the garage before you go out towards transit.
So Cindy, this is underground here, and this is either coming in underground, or it would come into a set of stairs with a covered walkway that would go to the terminal either underground or via an enclosed walkway.
It's just that I think the most successful pedestrian movements are the ones that are really visible to the person when they come through the terminal. I think just to kind of accent that the most would be helpful for our goals.
Well, when you mention stairs, it makes me think about elevators for ADA, once you have steps or ramps.
Jack?
Yeah, I'm taken back a bit by Rob's question, or not the question, but the answer that what we see here are all two-story buildings. I don't remember in previous parts of the discussions about alternatives us ever saying we've landed on two-story buildings. So how do we get there?
Well, you're given a couple of choices, and I guess I hate continuing to have to kind of say we'll go to the next step, but one of the next steps would be the view plane components and what can be done to kind of show what the buildings would look and feel like as they transition, especially the view corridor associated with Highway 82. We can increase the footprint of the building and create a larger footprint, but we still have to account for this elevation shift that's going to happen on this air carrier ramp, which then starts to drive the floor elevations of the main building. So in terms of whether you count it from existing grade or future grade, we can put a lot of stuff underground, but we have to create the square footage somehow, some way to be able to get there, and it's going to involve some higher building because of just meeting code off of the air carrier apron.
So ground, or the grade 0 really is the runway grade outside. That's really, you're not going to change that. So what they did to make it a low-profile building currently is they went below that grade, and that has led to significant maintenance and safety problems.
Yes.
Yes, Rachel?
I was just going to say, I know the concept of whether there was 2 stories or not was discussed at some level. I think myself that it's okay, and I see it, as going forward as an alternative. And you have a great opportunity for views in your waiting area and your holding area by being 2 stories, especially if the first story is a little bit more of that garden level discussion, not not too much. But I also, I look to the Airport Business Center and its development on the other side, and they're 2-story buildings, and I have a hard time saying, well, we have to hold the airport to a 1-story building, but the neighborhood in which it ends can be all 2 stories. So I think there's, they've evolved over time, and the airport's evolving over time.
If you look at also all of the plans show, all of the plans that have the consolidated parking show essentially a surface plaza that has a lot of potential to help screen the building, as well as make it a really great environment for people who are, utilizing the terminal.
Ready to talk about the reuse alternative?
Let's go there.
Reuse alternative. Essentially what we're saying in this alternative is that the additional square footage is primarily picked up in the concourse area. And then the remaining building, as much as possible, stay inside the existing footprint and renovate. Key items here is that in terms of the parking, you have a similar consolidated parking area to the simple design. the roadway system gets a little more complex, because one thing we have to do, or one of the goals, is to have curb frontage. Curb frontage allows you to drop people off. So you need to have the curb going as much as possible in front of the terminal. So similar to how Baltic is right now, where you come off and make the immediate right, you're going to be making the immediate right-hand turn and swinging away from the terminal and then coming back. Very similar layout. To get still have to do work on the ramp, and there's some other, we're fitting in the areas either in the garage or the pickup and drop-offs as we can in different areas. Questions on the reuse?
Yes, George.
So the parking remains the same in terms of the same area as was shown in the first scenario?
It's very, very similar, yes.
And same with the egress on and out, in and out of 82?
Correct. It comes from a little bit different angle, because the simple option, it comes from about here, and now you're coming from this direction.
In addition to the reuse is about, it's hard to say show on here, but basically you're doubling the size on that colored yellow area. That's
Correct. The majority of the square foot, the 35,000 square, is it 35? Yeah, 35,000 square feet is out here.
so I don't understand how, because that's coming out into the current apron. Isn't that really butting up, getting very close to the runway at that point?
Yes.
As a matter of fact, George, you may be interested to know that the taxiway lives right here, which is under the FAA air traffic control's control. Every time one of these airplanes has to back out of the gate, they're going to have to call the tower to get permission to back into the taxiway.
If you look, the jet bridges are a little longer, so we can push them to the side to give them some more room.
Chad?
So as I see it, there's actually another option for reuse, which has similar concept as far as the concourse, and I don't know exactly how to deal with that issue and avoid, calling the tower. You could move it up valley somewhat. Now, again, I don't know exactly planning and current ability, but also we don't have to redevelop all that parking. I'm not seeing a reuse. To me, there's an option here that's not on the table, which is maybe the 10-year option while we grow into needing the facility that Rachel talked about in 2027. Yeah, not, I make sure my 5-year increments. Therefore, we don't do all that parking. We reuse, and also, I'm sure there's got to be internal renovation to some degree, and again, we're not defining all of that, but at least I think for me that there is another reuse option or an intermediate step before going to this. And I assume this reuse, we could not build, kind of phasing, and this is another discussion, we could not do the parking, then even if we weren't ready to do a new complete terminal, there could be an evolution of parking as part of phases also.
Yeah, and just to remind you, Jack, the next portion of the work is to look at more detailed phasing for the alternatives that you want to see so evaluated, so that there would be a discussion of how you would phase from present day to this level.
So, just to, Jack, you're exactly right in terms of the discussion of, yes, it can be phased off the existing terminal. So say that this was a long-range plan of what you wanted to do. In this case, you could have a temporary connection into the existing terminal and build a portion of this concourse here. Now, and have that as a first phase, knowing that at some point, if you ever wanted to go there, you've laid out a plan that could happen 15 or 20 years from now. One of the things to think about when talking about the parking is that the area that is being used projected to be used to park aircraft is currently the long-term parking lot. So we have to find a home for the long-term parking lot. And at some point, you have to find a home for the employee parking and the long-term rental car storage. So, I mean, that's a factor that we're having to play in all these scenarios as we go through those.
Yeah, and that goes back to that original opening statement and conversation with Jim and the individual that said, gee, Frontier's left, why do we need to do this? Well, for me, a piece of that is, well, we won't need to expand for the additional planes because we can do 8 now. Was that what I heard? And, not saying that it's perfect. No, we know that is not the case. But anyway, it's all phasing, and that's another conversation. So,
one of the keys as we kind of cast a little further on the horizon is that phasing plan, and there probably will be economies of scale to do certain things at certain times because they fit well together. That kind of level of detail is still in front of us, but I think that we've tried very hard to make sure that every one of these concepts can be reasonably phased. We've thought about how it'll impact the operation when the improvements are going on and some of those kind of things. So this is a evolving and maturing process.
Ready for alternative 4? This is a kind of a unique layout that we started calling it the football when it started because the baggage area was actually curved with the highway when it started, and you had 2 sides of a football when it started. And then as it got refined, it ended up squaring up a little bit. So we called this segmented because what it does is it has the concourse and those functions out here. You cross a roadway, and you find ticketing. Sorry?
Cross the roadway underneath, right?
No, you go over top of the roadway.
top, sorry.
Yeah, this goes over top of the roadway here to ticketing. Ticketing's on the first floor, and there's a kind of a plaza area on top. And there's ramps, essentially, that continue down into baggage. And the idea is that you have your commercial operators and you have transit right out here. All in one spot, so people can choose from their commercial operator or going on transit, and their bags are right out there where they're getting ready to get into those vehicles. This is the largest of the options because you have those long hallways, because you have those ramps. This is another 20,000 square feet. This is 120,000 square feet of space versus 80,000 square feet. It also has some of the more complex road systems. Some of the key things is people have to be comfortable with letting people off on the opposite side of their vehicle. So they're offloading on the driver's side in this looping because you're looping through here, you're looping back is how this operates. The advantages here is that you're moving people close to transit, and that's the big advantage. The energy efficiency of having 40,000 additional square feet. Every square foot matters in terms of you're having to heat that. So something to think about. You have the same underground consolidated parking through the middle here with some room there. And you would come out of baggage and go back into the garage. Questions on this option?
I'm just looking at to think, how does it vary from the T? Is it necessary to break things up as much as this, whereas the T doesn't seem to?
We had some that had a let's push the envelope of how close we can make the transit interconnection, make a intermodal hub as much as possible, and that's where this came from. The T doesn't allow for looping very well through the airport. This allows for looping. You could do that with the T as well.
This one really sort of flowed out of the discussion. Let's create the opportunity to accommodate some future transit system that might be a fixed guideway or something that might work a little bit better than the Velociraptor system or what we currently work with.
Other questions on alternative 4?
I have a question regarding that concept of, having transit be more integrated with the airport. I mean, have there been any discussions with Raptor or the potential of, the buses going up and down Valley, or maybe a portion of the buses going up and down Valley, taking a loop into the airport road?
For probably 3 to 4 years, we've been discussing with RAPTA in different portions, and in most cases, what we've heard is we do not want the buses to leave the 82 corridor. So that is what we have heard from RAPTA themselves in relation to BRT and their mainline buses. That doesn't have to do with circulators. That could be funded through different entities or other ways, but that is what they've told us about their main run. So in all of our cases, we're trying to move the terminal towards the bus stop because we've been told the bus stop will not move towards the terminal.
Yeah, and just to add to that, in our North 40 planning group meetings over the last year and a half that's been coordinating with all of this, what we heard from the North 40 residents is they would really like to have that loop system so that they could have some a shuttle, if you will, go through the 100 road, go past the North 40 entrance and somehow come back around and make a loop through this road system that would make it more efficient and just get back into town that way rather than catch the main line RAFTA bus as the commuter kind of transit. And as Scott said, RAFTA has consistently said, our goal is to get people up and down the highway, and that would be a separate sort of transit system that very similar to the Aspen route kind of system. But it is a growing need from what we're hearing in our basically our west of Castle planning efforts.
Really, if you think about that, once you have the people in a shuttle, if there were a shuttle system that serves, say, Burlingame and North 40 in this whole area, you might as well bring them to the terminal, which is, set back from the highway.
That goes 50-50. I'm not a transit planner, and you need so much in origin and destination studies, but you sometimes lose your ridership from Burlingame because they're like, why are we going all the way out, looping through the North 40, and through the airport, and then loading when I just want to get to work in town. So again, there's always those trade-offs of how long the trip time is before people jump off the trip.
And the intent of BRT, I believe, is completely corridor-oriented, focus on the main trunk line.
It's an express bus system.
So additional future discussions about other shuttle systems or pieces of additions is a very future discussion.
And we have this at the Owl Creek intercept lot, the buses come off, pick people up in the parking lot and come back on.
A skier shuttle or Highland shuttle.
Okay. Only certain shuttles do that.
They do go to Burlingame.
And, not that there are any plans along these lines,
No.
but we do have a record of decision that has other transportation modalities, that we're also trying to stay conscious of.
That's
while
the
we
orange
do this
line down
design.
through here.
Describe what that means, John. I'm sorry, I don't
Well,
understand.
I believe it was a light rail line. Scott,
Yeah,
just
saving for
yeah.
that, yeah.
And so we do in the record of decision. Now, obviously, there are no plans right now in the works along those lines, but as we've been looking at transportation corridors or transit corridors, it's not just RAFTA, and it's not just the buses.
John, we'll just finish up. Hold on, and I'll call on you. We're just going to finish this discussion.
I was just an interesting thing about the record of decision. It had over 3,000 parking stalls at the airport in the as well. So, FYI.
Yeah, and it never talked about funding it or the character of the community.
No.
Okay. Any other comments on alternative 4 before we move on? So we talked a little bit about the,
Just a second. John McBride had his hand up. You wanted to make a comment, John, on this?
Clarification points.
Yes.
Rachel's point, the county commissioners required, besides the 200-foot setback from the highway right-of-way, that no building be higher than 14 feet for the first 30 feet. And in fact, if you take any point on the highway, there is no two-story building from that elevation. So everything effectively and visually is no more than one story. The other thing I just wanted to mention to you that I've been a fan for a long time of the crossing above or underneath, whatever, being further down valley. We may get nowhere with that, but I want you to know that there are an awful lot of kids, like 170 in the North 40, and if the college expands, I'm guessing that that bus stop would be used more by kids and students than airport people. And G.R. Fielding, along with John Columbus, came up with a very creative design, I think you've seen it, of a roundabout with an underpass diagonally from the North 40 side to the airport side, with a skylight in the middle, that would be a huge asset, because if people are coming from the North 40 to cross here to get to a bus on this side, crossing Baltic is almost as dangerous as crossing Highway 82. It's just something you might think about, because other people will be using that system and as you continue your planning.
ready to talk about flow through the building?
So we're going on to a subject involving each one of these alternatives?
Michael, we're going to show, what we're going to do is we're going to walk through and talk through how how the flow in one of the facilities can work, and let you know that we have thought through that in every one of the facilities.
Yes, George.
I'm just going to do a time check. We only have about a half hour left, and so if you want to get our comments as well,
Some of these should be fairly quick. We wanted to show how these work. So in this case, we're talking about what we're calling the segmented layout. In this case, what happens is we're following the flow of people going from when they get off the plane to when they get into their vehicle leaving the airport. You start in the whole rooms, you walk out of the concourse, you go over top of the road headed towards ticketing, and then you start ramping down. Now you go down to the second level in this structure. In this case, you've ramped over top of ticketing, and you're headed out to baggage claim. And then you hit baggage claim, and you can either go out to commercial operators or head back into the parking garage. That's just to give you an idea. Each one of these has that type of a discussion that's been done on those functional blocks that you see. Any questions on the surface flow before we go into surface parking evaluation?
Essentially, what you're saying is they can get out of the airport, right?
We've thought about it. It's not just a blob on a piece of paper. Okay, in terms of, we heard that...
Excuse me, Scott. Michael, may I?
Yes.
You have here terminal area level 3, 2, and 1 site. So there's 3 levels?
In this complex situation...
In 4. Alternative
4, there are 3 levels, yes.
And part of that attaches to underground parking, though. So that's okay. Thank you.
We heard the discussion and wanted to go through the surface parking evaluation with you. What we did is we said, okay, let's figure out how we can consolidate parking for the airport and what it's going to take to do that. Assumptions. There's going to be significant use of the setback required. The 82 corridor that currently is protected somewhat from views, it's going to be a struggle to try and protect the parking from those views. Distances, we said, okay, quarter mile, that might be okay. We use the term sea of asphalt. Another analogy would be, think of Glenwood Meadows. It's very efficient for its use, but from what we've heard, that isn't what we've heard as feedback as what people want in this community for their parking lots. Consolidation of parking is not possible without a portion of parking leaving the 82 side of the airport, at least as we can see it. If you want to make efficient use of other areas along the side of the highway for general aviation and other uses. And a keynote as we move into this next slide that you all have seen already in your packets is we looked at publicly held parcels within the area of the airport, and we just chose one parcel for illustrative purposes. It was the BMC West parcel because that is publicly owned, and it's right across the intersection. In no way is that supposed to say that that is what it's supposed to be, but that is one option that we saw in terms of a disturbed site that could be used. To give you an idea on parking, we have the functional areas. The red are the general aviation parking. Some of those are long-term parking. Some of those are pilots. Orange is the control towers parking lot. That is essentially fixed by function. The controllers work there. You have your short-term lot in yellow and your rental car pickup lot in yellow. And then you have your long-term and employee parking lots, and then the rental car storage. In the case of looking at surface lots, to get 1,300 positions, this is essentially what you would do is you'd move those into those areas. And we'll show this layout here in a little bit. In case of a parking structure, you take those same areas and the disturbed footprint is significantly less, consolidated in one location. To give you a layout of if the simple alternative was being looked at, this is how that could work. Since you do have to look at, since you do have to look at this in relation to fitting and parking, you can see the 100-foot setback line in here. In talking with community development, we understand that parking can be in the setback. It's not something that's would choose to do unless we have to. In looking at this in relation to walking distances for customers, there's about a 300-foot walk to the back of the short-term parking lot. So the radius that you see there is about a 300-foot lot from the center of the terminal. And so short-term can be covered in the lot right in front of the building.
Just a clarification, Scott. That represents the distance to the existing, the edge, the furthest parking space in the existing lot.
Okay. In the case of long-term, the long-term parking lot, we took a radius to the farthest point in the long-term lot, and that's this line right here. And then we went to the functional boundaries of where people could go. And that essentially encompasses the majority of this lot here. You will have employees and long-term extending out in this area in order to get the number of spots that seem to be needed. And rental cars, the long-term rental cars will most likely be across the street.
And what is that distance?
That's 830 feet, so under a quarter mile. In looking at that, one thing that we see is regardless of where this is, if it's off-site, you'll have be generating trips or generating a shuttle system trying to move passengers or vehicles. So in this case, what we see is we have the rental cars using this intersection to move vehicles back and forth. If we had a long-term lot down valley, down near Public Works or somewhere else, then you'd have a different type of shuttle system trying to move vehicles back and forth. Any questions on this?
So does that site right here represent the current BMC West owned by the city?
Yes.
Yeah, so obviously it's not happening.
And that was just for illustrative.
Yeah, I understand, he said that.
John, you had a comment?
Is that covered?
No.
Can't be done then? That the covenants that the county commissioners imposed on us would not allow that.
Would not allow what, John?
Uncovered large parking lot like that.
The BMC West side. Yeah, well, I don't think anybody's posted that as an option. I think they're just saying that's the amount of square footage it would take. And it has to go somewhere, and it can't go on the airport side, so, no, it's a non,
Jack, and then
sorry.
What I'm not getting here is why we cannot take the existing parking footprint, which is what I almost need here, like a miler, and put this alternative, the simple alternative for a terminal in there and make it work, other than the need, of course, to connect to transit. I understand that. But why can't a considerable portion of this airport remain the same and you put an improved terminal on it? That, to me, I've got to have a visual, I guess a miler understanding, because I'm not sensing from the numbers somewhere back here that there is so much substantial 926 parking now, and you're 1231, and that amounts to about 300 spaces. So there is additional spaces. It goes back to my concern or my need to understand and get convinced, that's probably even the harder part, that we need 300 more spaces of parking. What is now and why doesn't it work, the parking? I'm not sure it doesn't work. Now, there are certain peak days I know I drive through that lot and there's not a space. So I'm not saying no, never, ever, but as a phase, the things we talk about for phasing is what I want to know. Why wouldn't a new terminal work with the same footprint? Other than two less planes.
I'll tag on to that because my question was the same, and knowing that time is short. I think that'd be great to say which of these plans, simple or whatever, how many parking spaces are lost to make that plan happen, and how many are lost to make the other ABO, general aviation space, new design happen. So we end up with lost spaces that need to be replaced, then plus what is the projected new, so that then we can understand how we got to these parking layouts quite the same. And as it goes to phasing, I still would wonder, is it possible that, is there one underground garage and then with surface and then maybe a second underground is needed, or back to, as we've talked about before, that kind of Aspen Meadows tennis court type of parking where it's one layer underground, one on top of it, as opposed to 4 layers deep for cost and ventilation purposes. But that's what I would need to see as a Mylar, however.
I believe we've gone through the questions and comments on parking, Michael, or are there more?
Are there more from the commissioners on parking?
At this point, similar to what you had for general aviation, we prepared an alternatives comparison. We call it alternatives comparison matrix. You're going to have the same baselines on all of these alternatives, connections to transit, as much as possible, efficient use of the space, and some of the other items that we've talked about already. The design criteria, when you get into how the facilities work, that will come in later phases. But what we did is we looked at some of the key components we heard from the customers and from the different study committees and the charrettes, and we looked at efficient use of the terminal space, customer experience, impacts, minimizing lighting impacts, traffic on Highway 82. And in looking through those, reuse had some issues with the customer experience. We looked at it saying that for the construction phase, it would be very impactful on the customer. And you still have the layout of the existing terminal to try and work through. On the surface lots, you're extending their walkway, their walk. And we went through each one of these in that similar fashion. And that simple alternative keeps coming up as something that seems to make sense.
You have a simple 1A, 1B, but did we discuss that?
1A is the surface lot.
The surface lot.
Yes. 1B is with the consolidated.
So the only difference is the parking scenario.
Correct. Ready to move on?
I think so.
Just like Mark talked through last week, we've done some costing for comparative purposes only, and the similar disclaimers that you received last week still do apply this week. Federal funding, private investment, phasing, inflation, all those different things are not included. These are comparative purposes only that you'll see on the next slide. 1A is the simple alternative with a surface lot. You see that the terminal facility for 1A and 1B are the same. The difference is in the parking facilities. We included in the parking facilities procuring land in that, in addition to for 1A versus the parking structure in 1B. And as you go through each one of these options, you'll see some of those differences. Beyond the parking difference, a major difference is in that discussion of functional square footage versus actual square footage. So the T has about 20% or 20,000 additional square feet and more conveyors required, baggage conveyors. So 60 million versus 35 million. Reuse is fairly close to the simple alternative, 35 versus 43 if that's close, except you have to do some significant renovations in addition to the upgrades for the functional square footage. And then you get to the largest square footage, the largest cost, the segmented option. So you have a range of just under $100 million to $162 million. As has been discussed previously, the airport has done about 135 million, Jim, in the last 10 years. So the ranges are not too far away from some of the things that have already been discussed.
Yes, George.
Just a clarification, you said on option T, I didn't pick this up, option T is actually 20,000 additional square feet from
80,000, so about 100,000 square feet. And when you go to segmented, you go to 120,000 square feet.
But couldn't you have made that option T about the same square footage and still accomplish? It's just a different design.
The issue that comes into it is you have to have room for people to move between the different areas. And then you also end up having to segment some things that you can't recreate in terms of distances, like a bathroom. So you're adding space because of the distances, and that space turns into additional overall. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it just doesn't seem to be as efficient.
Understand it isn't as efficient.
Exactly the point.
Rachel?
Yeah, understanding that under alternative 3, the reuse has 9.1 million in repairs and renovations to the existing facility, which gets you down to a 35, for the new concourse. I'm just kind of wondering, because the size of the alternative 1 concourse, at least in the blob format, seems significantly larger than just adding the 1 concourse. Why are they comparable numbers?
We're assuming that you're going to have to do a significant renovation throughout the existing building, in addition to building the concourse.
Right, but again, so the 9.1 is major repairs, and it's not including the other portions of that change. Okay, thank you for that.
Yes, Jim.
Rachel, where did 9.1 come from?
It's
Reuse option for the same.
Okay. At this point, we're to discussion. We have a next steps if you'd like to go through that, but
Let's worry about discussion first.
yeah.
So, board, do you want to offer some feedback on these alternatives to our consultants? Okay.
Yeah, I'll start out by saying, for me, there's no question to stop with alternative 4, no further planning. I'm not interested in 40,000 square feet of circulation, unused, inefficient space. For both that reason, energy costs, future operation, and, of course, the initial costs. So that one's off the table. And then I go to what I like, and I think it's important, though, and I'll say this as a general comment, to have looked at multiple options, because you want to see what your that's what planning's about, what your universe of possibilities are. But I've come far enough to make that first statement. And then I absolutely do support 1B as, I mean, not all components, but we're going to go further and look at phasing and financing, so that's critical. So I like 1B, and so I'm in agreement with the committee, and I like the reuse, because there's a step that I think alternative 3 could evolve to 1B. And I'm sensing, I just don't see, is a better way of putting it, that our need is going to be so great in the 10-year cycle, 15-year cycle, but I don't know what the longer future is. When you look at build-out, et cetera, there's a lot of approved units around, but I don't see the market building a huge amount of infrastructure that's going to be completed. You even look at Somat's Village. I mean, you've got a lot of square footage that's not going to be built for a while. And so I think we have a real possibility of improving the airport, and that's what my question about parking, why it's in conjunction with Rachel's thinking, so both of us are getting kind of the same place, where you start and then you certainly might end up 1B in 20 years. Honestly, timing, I don't know. So I'm kind of, and I'm not too much interested in T also, because, or alternative 2, because there is 20,000 square feet. That's a fourth of the need, which is supposedly about 80,000. That's a fourth additional square footage that that's not efficient, and therefore we have to pay for inefficiency.
George?
Since it's Valentine's Day, I'm going to go with a KISS theory. You know what the KISS theory is?
Yeah.
Simple. Yes. So I'm supporting the simple alternative, which is 1B. The T and the unique, it just seems like it's very costly for not really gaining usable, effective space. So that's off the table for me. The issue of reuse, it's if I use the analogy of looking at an old home, and is it more efficient and effective to try to do a remodel on an old home, or just tear it down and build something that's going to be a better design, more energy efficient, and allow for a better use. And so the reuse, given that the costs are actually about the same, and the existing facility doesn't work well, and even after an extensive remodel still may not work as well as a completely newly designed 21st century terminal. it doesn't seem to make sense. 1B, as you said, the simple design allows for phasing in, so we could currently use the existing terminal and phase that in with perhaps an access point for a new terminal. So for all those reasons, for me, and frankly, you know, I just sit here and I'm not an engineer or planner, and we just go through these scenarios that you guys worked on, but you've also had a tremendous amount of input and conversations and discussions with a wide segment of the community. And to say that I'm smarter than them would be a little off base. But I think you've gotten a lot of good information, not only to the community but to us. And it seems like they are probably coming down to that simple method alternative for the same reasons that I am. So that's where I would focus my attention on, and try to tighten up the cost on that, and revisit the parking, because that seems to be a large issue that needs to be addressed as the next step.
Rob?
I'm very similar mind thought here. I don't think the 4 comes into play at all in terms of an option. Certainly 1A with the surface parking, I think that was just kind of posed to show us what that would be. It's not an option. The T option, there are 2 things I don't like about it. I don't like the traffic flow of 2 different sides of the airport having traffic coming and going. I don't like the additional cost to flow within the terminal of not spreading things out. Of spreading things out into that T format. I think that 1B is going to rise to the top, but I question what the next steps are of this process, or I should say with the next steps of the process, which I'm assuming are going to be a closer study of how we phase through into these things, how we finance these things, and what the capabilities are, and what the timeline of these things are. So I have a hard time taking off 3 reuse off the table at this point. I'd like to see it go through those steps, because I think the phasing plan and the impacts to our community of how 1B and 3 impact our community, I'd like to know the effects of those 2 things. Whether or not we should be going from A to Z, or if the only capability we're going to have is going A, B, C, D, E, and the phasing might lead us towards the reuse being the best option. George uses the analogy of tearing down a house and rebuilding it. Well, if you have grandkids and you want to build a room for them, you don't tear down the house and rebuild it. You build an extension to your house. So that phasing aspect is crucial. I still think option 1B is the best option if we can get through the phasing impacts of getting from A to Z in an easy manner. But I don't think we've reached that step yet in terms of what you've presented to us, in terms of how we phase the parking, how we phase the new construction, and what impacts that's going to have to our community over a period of time. 2 and 4, I don't love the options nearly as much as I love 1 and 3. But I don't think we should be taking 3 off the table. I'd like to know that we're going to go towards 1B, but it's hard to take 3 off the table unless we go through those phasing elements. And the visual impacts is another big one, which we haven't really talked about, and I'm really almost a little disappointed that it's not on your second slide of things that you consider: existing needs, financial, meet standards, environmentally appropriate. You should also put, visually appropriate, because I think that's an important part of our community, that meets the visual appropriateness of our community and that entrance into our town. And we might go down the road with 1B and have an outcry of the community saying, what are you doing building this big airport? And, there's some needs, but that's part of the community, that we like things small and tidy, and the phasing option to get to that larger side might be more palatable to our community.
Rachel?
Sure. I'm glad we've gone through these alternatives as thoroughly as we have, and I am going to settle down on supporting the kind of 1A and 1B as well. I was one of the ones really pushing to take a hard look at reuse, and I can see that there would be so much investment in reuse in terms of the parking, the road layout, things like that, that would then not really allow a phasing to something other than reuse. So I personally am willing to let that go now. I think that I've already mentioned the type of parking information I need for the next time, of lost spots and new spots that we need, and so on and so forth. What I'd like to see is seeing what we could do to work some of the finer or better elements of the other ones into the simple A. I mean, I don't know if that's bowing the concourse wall, as opposed to a straight wall. What are the elements of some of the others that may be able to be brought in or enhanced in the simple alternative? I would also continue to look at the enhanced transit connection, even if it's just a small gain. Particularly looking at the design here, I was wondering whether this taxi parking could be on the Up Valley side and the terminal could be a little closer to the old terminal. I just don't know. I mean, maybe you're allowing that space for construction purposes and things like that, but anything else that we can do to, get that to be a straighter line, or some visuals about how, at the user level, it is a pleasant experience. Cindy kind of alluded to it. What entices you to say, oh, I could have gone that way, I'll do that next time, type of movement. But, I don't think, as much as I am a big supporter of mass transit, that we can design the airport towards a transit system enhancement that may or may not happen over time. I think the cost differential in the airport designs is 1/3 or 1/2 of what light rail would be to get it in and out of Aspen. And so that would be a little too much cart before the horse, to my mind. And those are my only three points on that. It's just what other enhancements that make this a very unique and cool building. I don't want it to be that architectural statement, as we've all discussed, but at the same time, that doesn't mean it shouldn't have some kind of unique and modern characteristics. And the last is that I think we really should reevaluate what is happening with office space in the future. What used to be a standard for office space needed, whether it's back of house or whatever, is just evolving these days with the electronic media and things like that. It's not, people aren't storing quite as many files of paper and so on and so forth. So I want to make sure we've really kind of nailed down those needs a little more exactly. Thank you.
So I think you've heard a consensus, really, for the simple alternative. It sounds too simple, but there is a consensus for it. So you should proceed on that with the some of the variations, particularly in the parking area, and how we arrive at that, how that evolves to that, and I think we should go forward. Is that? I'll call on you, John, and then let me ask this question: is that a fair summary of the alternatives that we want our consultants to look at? Yes?
Is that saying, well, let's still leave the reuse in there, or A, but, for me, the phasing is the biggest issue, how to get where we might get someday. But I do not want to lose sight of that parking scenario, because I could, I chose 1B, but the parking, for me, is an absolute phased issue, which, we start out surface parking. I'm just not going to spend $57 million on parking when we don't need it. But we could someday.
What I heard was the simple alternative. I heard and there was also, I think, Rachel, or maybe it was Rob, for reuse, but I didn't hear a consensus on that. I heard, we should look at it, but I didn't hear a consensus. So I'm just trying to summarize the consensus point of view, which was the simple alternative. And parking, whatever alternative, was of a concern to the board. And how you make that conversion from surface parking to subsurface parking and what that involves. So is that fair? Yes, Rob?
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely for the simple alternative. My fear is that when we get to the next step, that we find something that hinders that the benefits that we get from the simple alternative. For instance, what if they said, well, we have to close the airport down for a year to get to 1B? Well, then I'd say, well, maybe the reuse is the better option. And I'm not saying that that's going to happen. I'm just saying that having a secondary option, what if we go down the road of the simple and all of a sudden it's too visually impacted for our community to have that sort of airport here?
Well, I think what will happen, there are various scenarios, like the airport closing for a year, like the structure not being liked by the community, but those are alternatives that would negate really what we're trying to do here.
Yeah.
And so I think the consultants are aware of that. There are various alternatives that wouldn't be acceptable to the community. So I'm trying to give them some clear direction. And the clearest direction I can get is alternative, simple alternative, look at the parking, and of course, we'd like to keep the airport open. So, yes.
I'm in agreement with your summary, Michael, and perhaps I think maybe this is part of it, because everyone keeps talking about phasing, reuse, and one. But if, say, the financing wasn't happening for 10 years, what improvements would we have to make to the current airport to be all of our goals during that time period? What do we have to do to it to use it, even if it's not the addition of a concourse to it, while we move forward with phasing, getting to the 1A? That's kind of how I see it evolving. I might not be saying it right, but what if we had to use the existing airport for another 20 years? What would we be recommending? Another 10 years, what would we be recommending?
Okay, John, we have to wrap up this conversation. I know there's lots of alternatives here, but we've committed to a citizen to have an interview at 5 minutes past that. I would like to try to keep to our scheduled commitments that we have. John, make it brief, please.
Comment. Thank you all for studying a community asset like you are. I mean, it's a valuable asset. To me, it's a great airport. Only one problem, when I land the Cub to get 10 gallons, Fred charges me a security fee. It's two things I want to point out to you guys that I think you should bear in mind. This airport cannot expand at all anymore. It's done. There can be no cross runways, no extended runways. It's there. So as you plan for it, you can really plan for the ultimate airport. Also, and we've talked about this before, it's the only resort airport as close as it is to the resort core. The average distance is about 40 miles. This is 3 miles. That offers an opportunity to do some very unique things. I personally feel we did some studies with Swiss Rail on that. So I think if you're talking about the growth of movements only being 5% over the next 5 years, maybe enplanements 30% with bigger aircraft, you've got time to do the ultimate good airport, in my mind. It's working well now, and I hope you take advantage of that, because it really can be a very unique one, and it can't get any bigger. So good luck.
Okay, staff, you've got your direction. When are you going to come back? Let's try to keep this fresh, because it is difficult for us to remember. So just project out. Is it going to be 3 weeks, a month? What do you think?
I hadn't looked at it that tight, Michael. What I think we're going to do is take last week's feedback we just got here, and we'll try to get back in front of you with kind of combined concepts. It will take a little while to run the finance plan, so that's probably at least a month or 6 weeks, I'm guessing, to run through those scenarios and feel good about coming back to you.
Personally, I would feel that even if it isn't fully baked, that you still keep us in touch with us on this. And I don't expect perfection at every meeting, but you can say, this is the direction we're headed in. And I think that's important to come back to us frequently.
It may make sense to come back with, some responses to some of these pointed questions
Yes.
related in particular to parking.
Yes.
Sooner.
Yes, John?
And we'll also, on the 21st, I'll be talking to you, we'll be having a follow-up from our last briefing on the airport master plan area. So that's going to be an executive session with some of the questions the board had. And then we can try and schedule a follow-up on some of the immediate questions, I think, that were asked around parking, besides the threshold questions, I think, for moving forward with questions.
With all that said, Michael, and your comment saying we don't expect perfection, we can bring back increments and pieces as they mature and keep you in the loop if that's where you want us to go.
Yeah, it just helps us to move along, I think, and not stumble every 3 months at a really significant presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So it's almost 3:10. Corby, are you here?
Yeah, right here.
Can you indulge us and let us take a break till 3:15?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. So, board, we're going to take a break until 3:15.
And Michael, we can bring imperfect work back as fast as we can.
Okay, this is the BOCC work session. It's Valentine's Day, February 14th, 2012. It's a little past 3:15. We've just finished with our airport terminal analysis, and we are now on to a citizen interview with Corby Anderson for our translator board, and Corby is here right now. Thank you, Corby, for being here, and thank you for volunteering. And also for, we're going to put you through a very difficult interview process. I want you to be totally at ease. Thank you for being here.
Thanks. I'm proud to be here.
So, board, do we have questions for Corby?
Yes.
Okay.
Hi, Rachel.
Hi, Corby. How are you?
I'm great.
Really good. I'd like to ask, what is your, I know your background with Grassroots TV, but what is your continuing interest in the translator system?
You know, I've been involved in media, or specifically in radio and television, since I was 16. I think it's all I ever wanted to do as a kid was to be a broadcaster. So, and ever since then, I've actually one way or the other found some way to stay involved. I've been away for about 3.5 years, and I just moved back in April, and really wanted to get back more involved in the community. I used to work at Grassroots TV and was really involved in the community. I felt like I was constantly a part of everything that was going on, and since moving back, I haven't felt that as much. So I thought if I looked at some volunteer boards, that might be one way to help pay back to this community that I love a bunch. And knowing my background in broadcasting, I thought this was a good fit.
Thank you.
Any further questions for Corby? Yes, Rob.
As you're probably aware, we had a ballot question last election that expanded the use of our translator fund to internet and wireless and broadband type uses, and it was really just a language change for, I think, what would have originally been the intent of the voters when it first passed. But any ideas how that might change how these translators are used, or?
Offhand, and I didn't know about that, I think I probably missed most of that election as I was just getting back to town. Was that last May or October?
Last November.
November, yeah. So I don't know much of that offhand. I'd have to read up on it, and I'm pretty quick study about those things, so certainly interested in finding more about it, but I don't know offhand.
Jack or George?
I have a question, maybe more for Jody, but you can weigh in as well. This board meets on a monthly basis?
Every other month.
Every other month. And what do they usually discuss? Is there any sort of big issue that they're working on right now?
Well, right now we're working on some policy cleanup, cleaning up the bylaws for the board and how they operate, the FM and TV use policies. That's been our big topic last month, and we actually have a translator advisory board meeting tonight. It was our second meeting, and that's what our focus is, talking about the site conditions and then working towards prioritizing what we want to do next, whether it's the broadband or translator upgrades, that kind of thing, site upgrades.
So Corey, since you've got an extensive background in multimedia, where do you see the potential for our translator system going?
I think that, again, I've been gone since some of the advances were made in the last 5 years. I know that there was efforts to get, for example, Pickens County TV in a more broad area. I'm sure that internet, it sounds like there's been major advances in reaching some of the smaller communities with some of those public outlets. But, again, I'd have to, I think, read up on what the goals and missions are.
Do you have any sort of vision in terms of where you think the service should be going for the county?
I mean, I know, first of all, I think that having over-the-air television and radio accessible to all the communities in the county must be a huge goal of the department. That would be a priority for me. And so I think not everyone can access cable, so having, or broadband necessarily, so having some option for over-the-air television, over-the-air radio as an emergency system, and anything that can be done to have internet in some sort of accessible way for everyone, I think must be a goal.
Jack, do you have any questions?
One of our boards and organizations' goals this year is, of course, to work towards countywide broadband and, all the things that means. Have any ideas how we might enhance the system in order to get there through the translator system?
Offhand, I don't. I don't know what the system currently entails. I would just need a briefing, I think, to get caught up on that. So I'd kind of be guessing at this point, but it's something I feel capable of absorbing and then learning quickly and being able to recommend back to your board, once I'm caught up to speed.
Rob?
Thank you. I don't know if the rest of the board knows this, but you produced about 30, 40 shows for me at Grassroots Television, and you were there for a long period of time. And we worked together on a lot of things, and I saw it was probably about 3 or 4 year period of time that we worked together on various things. There were a lot of advancements that happened with Grassroots Television over that period of time, and I think that's what we're talking about with the translator system. We don't know what the advancements are. We're not sure what they are. Tell us a little bit about what you did over that period of time with Grassroots. I know they went to digital with a lot of things, a lot of technology changes and that sort of stuff.
I think, my second stint at Grassroots as station manager started in 2001 when John Masters was hired as executive director. And that was when there was a real push to upgrade the station. It had kind of fallen on hard times. My job was kind of the technical side of the business, although John certainly had a ton of input on things. But I had to make it happen. We had to take either old equipment and make it work with new systems or integrate new digital recording and playback systems that were, in some cases, were actually like cutting edge for the entire industry. There was a point where Grassroots was playing, and I think they may still play mostly off of DVDs, but there was a time where everyone else was working off of tape. We were like the first station in the country to be using cheaper DVDs that had a higher quality look than tape, and I integrated like new programming systems, new digital recording archives, sort of what's now like known as a video library. New graphics capabilities, worked with the translator department to at least plan for getting the signal further out to Redstone and further out to Emma, I believe up to Thomasville. I don't think at the time Grassroots was over the air up there. So worked, did a lot. I mean, it was 7 or 8 years of intense production. We did like 900 shows a year at one point or something, or 800, and I was a big part of helping those get to air in some way or another. So a lot of sort of analog to digital conversion and just putting new systems in and figuring them out and debugging them, and not necessarily a trained engineer, but I've certainly learned on the job over the years how to troubleshoot. And like I said, I've always had an interest in radio as well, and picked up many things in that side of things as well.
Great. So any other questions for Corby? Corby, thank you for being here, and thank you for being patient with our schedule. It's sometimes difficult to keep on schedule when we have really major discussions, but we deeply appreciate you coming for this interview.
Thank you.
And typically we, at some point, get together and decide on appointments and get a letter, and we'll see what happens.
Let me know.
Thank you, Corby.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Jody, for being here. And maybe you can tell Corby where that meeting is tonight. So, where are we?
We're running a little ahead, we're at memos of interest.
We are running ahead?
Oh,
They caught up on the break.
break before as
Okay.
opposed to after.
Okay, memos of interest.
So if I have staff coming in here on the memo.
Cindy, are you here for the update on the Castle Creek, or are you just, are you
I'm here for open discussion.
here for open discussion? So, is there going to be a staff member updating us on the Castle Creek campus updates?
I think Suzanne was going to be coming over. So maybe since we're running a few minutes ahead, I could just address the next memo, which is there is a request for us to look at the Treasurer and Public Trustee Bill, Senate Bill 1230, concerning administrative matters related to foreclosure sales. In essence, I think what you see in the memo is this was really a housekeeping bill. Staff didn't find anything that we found particularly concerning related to that piece of legislation, so we didn't have any recommendations for you moving forward.
Does the staff want us to, I see they support the bill, do they want support from the county commissioners?
I don't think this is a very controversial bill, and so we could certainly write a letter of support, but it's not one that we're seeing as.
Rich, do you have a question?
Yeah, and I read through this. This is an issue that at CCI, I don't know if people were acting off of provisions that may have been dropped from the bill or just rumors about the bill, but there was a lot about, our county treasurers and counties keeping too much excess revenue from the various bankruptcy foreclosure proceedings, and should that money be siphoned off to the state. And again, based on Tom's read of this bill, it doesn't seem to be saying that, but that was what we were keeping our eyes out for and wanting to know more about, because there was a series of Denver Post articles that, hey, counties are receiving all these excess revenues because of the sales on the courthouse steps, and shouldn't they be putting that money back into homeowner counseling or programs to assist homeowners as opposed to balancing their budget, whereas other county commissioners are making the point, well, there's many years where the treasurer's office is not making money and it's supported out of the general fund of the budget of the county, and therefore, it's appropriate to even out during these time periods. So, as long as Tom is sure that that's not, somewhere kind of woven within this, then, I think it's okay to be supportive, but that was the concern.
Yeah, I would leave this to Rachel and Jack. This is one of a series of bills that will be coming before CCI. You guys get the most up-to-date information, and so I would not rush to support this until you guys have a better understanding and update of what's going on.
Yeah, and Jack, I was just going to say, I'm assuming Jack was the one who asked for an update and Tom's analysis on it, because people at the table, I think, down there were somewhat shooting from the hip, saying, but wait a second, wasn't there something about, what do they mean by excess revenue, and where does the excess revenue end up at the end of the day? And,
I certainly appreciate Tom's position. That George is in step with, I think, where we should be at. We'll monitor the concerns. Staff will be finding out a little bit more information. It looks like it's certainly a supportable bill, but we do want to clear up the cloud around it, about where the money's going, the public monies versus what it might be used, because at the end of the day, and as I said the first time we discussed this, ultimately foreclosures are not, there's no way it benefits communities or people. So, there's the people piece of this. So, we're going to have to just monitor it and see, where it's headed.
seriously.
Tom, we were
Thanks,
just...
Tom. That was a good discussion.
Well, not entirely. But the gist of the conversation was that you see no problems with this bill. And both Rachel and Jack understand your position, but are still not quite clear on what is meant by excess revenues and where they end up going. And so they would like to monitor the progress of the bill further. Does that seem to make sense for you?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, Jack.
Yeah, Tom, basically this issue of the money staying within the counties versus, maybe helping the people who are having the problems, make segmenting part of this revenue stream there, came up at the last CCI meeting. So we're saying, well, let's not just jump into support as is. Let's see how it evolves through CCI to the next meeting before we really go after, as an individual county, supporting it. And that's why there's just a little reservation. It's certainly a supportable bill for all the reasons you articulate. The question did come up.
Yeah, the last update we had from the public trustees lobbyist says that the bill was laid over for third reading in the Senate due to the delay in getting an amendment drafted that assures the senators and public trustees will make reasonable efforts to get overbid proceeds to the appropriate parties. And secondly, gives clear instructions for disposing of unclaimed overbid proceeds. So it sounds like your concern is being addressed by an amendment that is forthcoming. So.
Okay, thank you, Tom. Appreciate your time.
Thank you much.
I see that Suzanne is here, and maybe we can move on. Would that be all right with the board? Move on to Castle Creek campus updates.
Jenny Elliott came too, just in case you have questions about what's happening.
And Jenny, why don't you just introduce yourself and let the public know what your position is out at the music school?
Sure. My name is Jennifer Elliott. I'm the Vice President for Finance and Administration at the Music Festival.
Okay. And you're involved in the campus
I am.
update? Okay.
I'm very involved in the campus redevelopment.
Okay, good.
That's the short answer. So basically, we're just here to give you an update since the Music Festival had been in front of you talking about changing phasing with the master plan project out at the campus. And they'd asked for an amendment that was then withdrawn. There were concerns raised by Country Day, and there's been a lot going on, I think, since then. And basically, the short version from my end is we don't feel that we need any sort of amendment to the master plan to address the phasing that they're discussing now, but we thought it would be worthwhile to come to you just to keep you up to speed, since you've probably seen things in the paper about what's going on, and just thought it would be a good opportunity for you to ask any questions you might have and kind of update you on what's happening. But so the short version is that they have an agreement now to move the Country Day students off campus to the Meadows campus for next school year, so 2012-2013, which will allow them to fast track a lot of construction out on the site. And that really addresses a lot of the concerns that were raised by Country Day related to construction going on while kids were on campus. That will still be a fact of life further down the line, but by pushing forward some of these projects all at once, it will allow them to have the central part of campus separated off from the later phases of construction. So, and it also gives them the opportunity to really kind of bust it out and really, move on some buildings. So there will be a lot of construction going on out there starting end of August, early September?
September 1st, yeah.
September 1, pretty much. And then Country Day School will move back on campus by September of 2013. So it will be a year's worth under those two phases. And I think you all have that phasing diagram in front of you, but just quickly, the combined phases, as you can see, what we know is the lower school building, which is that first building on the left when you drive into the campus. is the big school building for Country Day, and also you can see along the side of the slope there below Castle Creek Road, those practice rooms would be installed. And then the orange buildings in the cluster by the Great Pond, which are two of the large rehearsal halls and sort of facilities associated with that, and an additional cluster of the practice rooms on the other side of the campus. So those would all happen during that year's time while the Country Day students are off campus. And then, then there will be the future phases that address, the other pieces that will come later. But I think for now, the big push is for that first phase, and that's kind of where we stand. So as I said, we don't feel there's any need to do an amendment to the master plan, so this was really just sort of informational for you at this point, and thought it would be helpful to have Jenny here if you have any questions, more detailed questions about how things are going to proceed.
Rachel?
Yes, thank you. First, I'd like to say it seems from this plan moving forward so quickly that the MAA and the Country Day schools have kind of worked through their issues and have reestablished the long-term relationship for a joint campus.
That's correct.
That's wonderful news for all of us.
Yes.
I really appreciate
Very exciting.
whatever it took from both sides. But that's very good. And then the second question I have, which buildings on the map, I know there was the one historic building that we worked through to be preserved and saved, but when would any renovation and restoration of that would occur in the phasing?
Sure, so there's two historic buildings. Number one, which is in green,
Okay.
and so that is in the third phase. And then building 18, which is also on this map, and that was the building that the BOCC agreed that we could relocate. And at the moment, we may not relocate it because that was planned. You'll see there's a building 7 there that's currently in black. And we may not need building 7 right now, and that's based on Country Day school enrollment, basically. As we get through the phases, if we decide we're going to need more practice room space or classroom space, we may build building 7, which would mean relocating building 18. So anything that happens to either building 1 or building 18 would be in the third phase or even later.
Okay, but in the meantime, you're keeping them up?
Absolutely.
Especially 18, I know you will on the main building, because that's...
Yep, and so we still have staff in building 18. The Music Festival administration is year-round in building 1 and building 18, and we'll be in building 18 until the completion of phase 2, where building number 2, which is bright pink, is completed. The people that are currently in building 18 will move over to building 2. So we are keeping those up, and as part of recording the master plan, which is in process as we speak, we are recording historic covenants for both of those buildings.
Great, thank you very much for the update. Appreciate that.
Ford? Yes, Jack, and then George.
Yeah, this was a long and arduous process, and we certainly worked hard to make things work on a very, very, very tough site.
Yes.
Understatement from a hazard point of view. So I agree, and I'm sure we all do as a board and the community. That's great to see progress is made and you're moving forward. My one question, it's going to require a construction management plan, and I would assume it will entail year-round construction. So and this is for Suzanne, within the construction management plan, is there a way to be sensitive to the hazards on the site, on the side that we were, had some concerns about avalanche?
Yeah, I mean, the activity envelope was drawn to, avoid those to the extent possible. The Keno Gulch improvements have been completed.
Right.
So I think that's one of the main hazard that affects the site. So, that was preceded any construction out there, which is a good thing. In terms of the construction, I mean, on the far side with any potential avalanche, if you remember, the practice rooms are essentially being built like bunkers into the slope, and basically will kind of be like shed roof for any.
Exactly.
So in the wintertime they won't be used. But I think, I guess the short version would yes, the construction management plan is, they'll be working with the site and ensuring that when they're working in certain areas, people won't be in those areas, and I think being aware of all of any
Yeah, and
hazards on the
that's,
site.
it's all about phasing within the phase, and that's item number 12, the practice rooms, right?
That's correct. And the biggest, the red zone, if you will, is in between the last of Building 12 and Building 12.7, which is in black. And the only activity that happens there would be the extension of some utilities. And I know that that is one of the first things they're going to do in September. Getting the utilities in the ground is the first thing that they're going to do when they come on site September 1. So I would hope that those would be all buttoned up by the time any of those concerns would happen.
Yep, great, you're moving forward.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Suzanne or Jennifer? Yes, George?
On the construction management plan, I remember the last time you were here, we talked about some of the impacts and scheduling the traffic and the trucks back and forth. And now, this seems like it's going to be a lot more going on in this period of time. So as part of the construction plan, we're looking at traffic control and impacts of trucks and parking and things like that, especially in light of the ongoing construction at the Aspen Valley Hospital. So Castle Creek Road is at least that first couple miles is going to be extremely busy. And of course, we all know in the summertime how heavily used that road is for cyclists as well as just travelers heading up into the backcountry.
So for summer, I can start with for summer, that would be summer 2013. By that time, everything in orange, Phase 1B, will be completed. The Music Festival is going to use all those orange buildings in the summer of 2013, as well as the practice buildings that are in yellow in Phase 1A. The only thing that will be under construction during the summer of 2013 will be the interior of Building 15. So Building 15 will be closed up. And so I think from a construction traffic point of view, summer of 2013 is not going to be a big deal. Once you get to interiors, usually you don't have those kinds of issues. For the rest of the year, as far as how we will deal with interacting with both hospital traffic and Castle Creek Road, the one really good thing about having Country Day School off campus is that we're going to have a lot more space on site to park trucks. We don't need to stage them on Castle Creek Road, or, they can all come, whenever we decide is the best, and we have talked about coordinating with Hazelden about when they're doing big deliveries. We'll have space on campus for them to park. Before we had talked about doing a lot of down valley.
Right.
And
eliminating all the traffic to and from the school.
Right.
So that I guess
No
there's
parents.
a little bit of no parents coming and going, but
Yeah.
Any further questions? Suzanne, Jennifer, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So are we on to future agendas?
Future agendas. Few things for you. Reminder that tomorrow we do have a meeting in Basalt at Town Hall, and it's a public meeting really with the Colorado Parks and Wildlife Commissioners regarding the Bureau of Land Management Resource Management Plan and our comments related to Crown, Whitehall, and Hardin and Kittle. We did not post agenda materials for that. It's really going to be a presentation. The bulk of the evening is going to be a presentation by wildlife officials. But we are facilitating that meeting, so I will be giving some opening comments. We'll have ComDev staff there to summarize our comments relative to those areas, and then hand it over to wildlife staff to talk about the information that we saw in developing our comments, and let the folks who come know how they can make their own comments on the BLM's resource management plan, whether they agree with ours or not. And so, again, that's at 6 o'clock tomorrow at Basalt Town Hall.
Okay.
Yeah, I was thinking about this earlier in preparation of this meeting, and, the language of our comments is important, and I don't know if we've ever seen the final product. So I would infer that at least the areas that we're going to be talking about, maybe we can excerpt them or something. You know, the Crown, Light Hill, Albany, Kittle, the Basalt access. We might at least get a copy of those because I think we might get pinned on a couple things, you know, or seriously questioned, you know, however you want to put it. So I'd like background about what we said.
I think that's fair. And we'll definitely get that for you. And, you know, tomorrow is really about providing the public an opportunity to understand what our comments were. There seem to be two levels of potential misunderstanding, what our actual comments were, and then background on why we made the comments we made. And the public still has an opportunity to comment individually on the resource management plan, and we'll make sure they have the information to do that if they wish. So.
Yes, Bob.
I'm just curious I know that there is an agenda, you're not putting out materials until we get there, but is there an outline of time frame for various topics? I mean, just saying a starting time at 6 o'clock is a little vague to, one, the general public on how long the presentation is going to be, one, question and answers are going to be accepted, how much time we're going to allow for that, all of that.
Well,
and how it's going to be run as a...
Well, I have been volunteered to facilitate the meeting, so I will be facilitating the meeting. Our introductory comments are going to take about 15 minutes. Cindy, have you heard back from Wildlife about how long their presentation?
Not specifically how long they expect, but we do put together a draft agenda, thinking that the bulk, obviously, of the meeting would be with the division, with the Parks and Wildlife officials speaking, and then allowing time, a little bit of time, maybe another 10 minutes for our staff to talk a little bit about our decisions, our recommendations to the BLM and how that process works. And then probably that would leave about 45 minutes for the Parks and Wildlife officials to talk a little bit about their overall wildlife knowledge of the area and their recommendations, and then a little bit of time for questions. The one thing that we haven't worked out yet is whether or not they would like us to just entertain questions during their discussion or wait until the end. So we're just going to talk to them about that as we go.
Yeah, I would hope at least the Parks and Wildlife get a chance to do their presentation in one piece so they can cover things and, you know, ask people to make notes, whatever. But I'm hoping at the end that, John, it sounds like you're going to facilitate as opposed to the chairman, that you give us an opportunity, if we would like, as commissioners, to make a couple comments. Last time we went to El Jebel, we kind of had a really great interactive session and board work, but at the end we didn't have a chance to say anything, as it were. And I think it's important that we make a couple comments ourselves, because I don't think it's going to be exactly, as I understand the format, a dialogue where people are going to ask individual questions of us. Parks and Wildlife, I got to get trained here. Parks and Wildlife are really going to be the basis of this with staff feedback.
Right. This wasn't.
But they're putting it on us as far as the decision.
And this wasn't so much about our comments or even the BLM is an opportunity for the community to hear from Parks and Wildlife about the basis of these decisions, and we were just playing a facilitative role.
But if I might add, Michael, but the tone of the emails was not about information, it was about politics and saying those who are rerunning for commissioners shouldn't be. So that's, you know, this is part of the process.
All right. Other item, Tuesday, February 21st. Currently, you see that we do not have anything scheduled in the morning. We would like to propose a follow-up executive session from our last, not the airport meeting we had today, but the previous airport meeting on the master plan, because we were asking a number of questions of our attorney about the boundaries and such, and we think this would be a good time to schedule executive. I think given the nature of our past discussions, Jim and I were debating whether this was going to take an hour or hour and a half. I would rather err on the side of caution and go from 10 to 11:30 for an hour and a half, and then have from 11:30 to 12:30 for lunch, a little bit early lunch. Does that work for everyone?
Yes, George?
Yeah, but we may be able to fill in that extra half hour for the board to talk about, finish up with the board with personnel evaluations and salary considerations and things like that we haven't really had an opportunity to discuss.
We could certainly...
So we could fill that gap.
Okay.
Yes, Jack.
So untypical of our usual process, we only have a half hour on this agenda for lunch, so those who think it's important to have an hour for lunch, we ought to accommodate that with George's comments.
And that's what I was suggesting, from 10 to 11:30, then you could have 11:30 to 12:30 for lunch on here.
But that doesn't leave, I thought you indicated maybe an hour and a half, because if we're going to have this conversation, we ought to have all of it, and George's comments seem to have affected a little longer.
So perhaps you're suggesting we should either start at 9:30 for the executive, and so we'd have a full 2 hours for that, and then a half hour for any remaining personnel issues, and still have an hour lunch.
Okay. We think you can do it in an hour. I don't know. And so if you want the safety, we can start at 9:30. That's up to you.
Well, to me, we've expressed our concerns, the chair and the manager ought to figure it out.
All right. And then I just bring your attention then to March 1st. The EOTC subcommittee meeting has been changed to sister cities versus the council chambers, and that, I think, was a request that came out of your last meeting.
Smaller room.
Yeah. So that's all I have for you on future agendas.
Yes, Ross?
February 21st, we've got an hour set aside for discretionary fund. Is there any...
No, that was a follow-up, and I guess we could talk about whether you all still want to have this discussion. At the end of last year, when we were deciding the final distribution of the board's discretionary fund, you requested that we bring a discussion back for this year to see if we wanted to set a policy, more of a policy guidelines around use of that discretionary fund. So we're responsive to that. If that is not a discussion that the board wants to have, we can certainly fill that time elsewise.
As I recall, it was requested by Rob.
It was a request by Rob, and I think our understanding was there was agreement that we'd come back and talk about that this year.
Yes.
I'm certainly not opposed to having that discussion because it's a board request, but I'm not for changing the discretionary fund at the moment, because it's what it is. It's a discretionary fund, and I like the flexibility. If you start setting policy, then you might get stuck in, like this year we did something very unusual. We had a lot left, and so amongst us we agreed to have it distributed. So not against, out of respect, but not for, because the need.
Yes.
Yeah, I think the meeting's discretionary for me. I mean, we're happy to meet. I don't think we need an hour. Rob had asked for it, but I agree with Jack. I don't see any, I'd like to start here a discussion, but personally, at this point, I don't see any policy changes or direction in this discretionary fund for when we hear of needs from the community.
This one.
And maybe it's just me as a new commissioner, if there is a policy already in place, and that policy may just be, it's at the discretion of the Board of County Commissioners. But, I'm being a first-time year to this, the only time that any discretionary stuff really came up before us was either, someone coming up before us asking for $500, or the end of the year divvying it all out. What's the policy for a commissioner bringing something forward? What's the, I guess maybe it's something that someone could just feed me information on what is the historic precedence for use of the discretionary fund.
Yes, Rachel.
Yeah, I don't think we need an hour. I think there may be a discussion, but it is a little awkward sometimes when we all search our memory to say what has been customary, and we don't have that. It's been customary to maybe but repay part of their land use planning fees, but we never pay the refund on the liquor license fee. That's been our custom, but is there some point in which we want to memorialize a custom? We've also discussed at least a little bit that we don't want the whole discretionary fund over the course of time to just be a refund of fees fund for nonprofits, and that, we are comfortable doing that for groups sometimes, but does it start to feel automatic to them or automatic to us, and should it be something that, we can do this for X many years in a row for someone, and then we say, no, you've had this event year after year, save a little of the money from last year for your upcoming fees, because of that. And so those are the types of things that I think are a little, I agree totally with getting as much discretion in there as possible. I don't want to start saying what has to be a 501c3 or otherwise this or it can't be that, but I think there may be some parameters of our past use that are worth having as guidelines, or just a little more formalized. One that particularly also came up was out of the discretionary fund, there was some funds given for the support of the Marines' annual lunch, and I was going to raise, well, look, if we're going to do this every year, why not have it in the budget instead of have it in our discretionary fund, so that they have to come in and ask each year. So those were just a few of the types of small cleanups that I saw as potential happening with the discussion. I was looking at the same day here and wondering if the 2:30 facilities projects update, being only a half hour, might be a little short of time. And maybe it makes sense to flip it around and give the discretionary fund a half hour and give the facilities projects update an hour.
Yes.
Yeah, we do have a policy relative to this. Remember, I think it was the year before you might have come, Rob, talking about in order to qualify to get to first base, they have to, if they had an event, they had to be consistent with the land use code and no problems with it, and et cetera, et cetera. I think that was on the, ComDev side. So it would probably be helpful, at least if we saw whatever is in that, it's a short document, a page and a half or something. We had to maybe put that in our memos of interest so we can read that ahead of time and then further this conversation, because this is in February. Oh, that's February 21st. Oh, okay. Well, yeah, I'd say a shorter conversation. If we need to, we can have another one.
Yeah.
We can, we'll work on that.
In 2,000 words or less.
The main characteristic of the fund is that it's very small.
That's right.
And that's something that we've kept to, because we could increase it if we wanted. But Rob, if you'd like policies, you should just suggest them at that meeting, because it is fairly free form. So.
Okay.
That's all I had on future agendas, unless anyone else said.
Just let me say, I'll be absent on the 13th and the 14th.
March.
other items before open discussion?
So for future agendas.
Michael, you ready to move on to open discussion?
Yes.
Have several items for you, and I'm going to hit two related to Cindy's area right off the bat. And the first one is a heads up that next week you're going to be seeing MOI requesting, with the board requests that we have a little bit of flexibility with the monies that you appropriated for pick and iron. And we're not asking for any more money, but as directed, environmental health staff has been working with the homeowners association as we go through the bid process and that sort of thing for replacement of the, I believe, 1 and 2 leach fields. Carla has identified some alternatives that may be less costly and more effective, that may more holistically address the issues at Pick and Iron. And so we wanted to tell you what we've learned. We've had some preliminary discussions with representatives from the homeowners association, and feel that we want to make you aware of these alternatives and see if we can have a little bit of flexibility within the dollars already appropriated. You're very specific about how those were to be used, so we want to have that discussion with you next week. The other item, which it's brought up, this one.
So do you want an answer on that?
We're going to have a discussion next week.
Oh, so it's a full discussion.
Yeah, we wanted to run the alternatives
Thanks,
by
I
you so that
sometimes-
you'd understand them. I apologize, I was just giving you a heads up. So.
As well.
Can you just make sure that that comes to us as a full MOI with all of the background information and proposals as opposed to something that you just spring on us that day?
Yeah, no, we're going to...
I want to prepare for that.
You're going to have an MOI on that one. The other item that we wanted to talk to you about is, you may recall during Cindy's last semi-annual update, we had talked about with the staffing changes and such, we were looking at the potential of looking at how we schedule services and hours for community development. And I'll let Cindy go into more detail, but in essence, as we're coming into this next year, we're seeing two things that are going to be driving workload over the next year. One is implementation of the new community development software package, which is going to take, it's going to make us more efficient in the long run, but during implementation, it takes quite a bit more staff time for data input and conversion and that sort of thing. And we also are coming into construction season, we're hoping we'll become busier at the front desk. And so we're looking at making some changes one day a week in terms of what services are going to be available. We wouldn't be shutting down, but we may be changing what services are available. And Cindy, with that,
Yeah.
do you want to...
No, just the background. I know I tried to talk to you a little bit about it. I think it was October when I came before you with that semi-annual update. And at that time I said, because we had reduced the staff and taken out a front desk position, we were using the other positions to fill the front desk, which I think is a great thing because we have a lot of cross-training, and I really appreciate that in the office because we had often in the past had trouble with if someone were out sick from that or on vacation. The system in place now, our Eden computer system, unless you really use it on a daily basis, you aren't as confident with it when you're trying to issue permits or take in permits or do any of the financial work involved with the front desk tasks. So, and just the information available. So I had pulled in several of the other positions to man the front desk, if you will. And as our new computer software system is coming online and the design of that system, we're finding that we're going to need more of those more administrative folks' time to help with the development of that system. And we're finding, what we've done is we've kept logs over the last year and a half of the busiest times
at the front desk. And so we're making some decisions about when we can say, we're still going to be at the office, everybody's still going to be there 5 days a week. It's just that some of the services like submittal of planning applications or submittal of a building permit or issuance of those permits are what we're saying we are not going to have the full capacity to do 5 days a week. So the beautiful part about it is about 85-90% of our customers are repeat customers. We have direct access to those people. We know who the contractors are. We know who the planners are that make these submittals. And we'll be in discussions with them. We'll be doing email blasts as well as talking to them on the phone and letting them know about those new hours for submittal and non-submittal. So we're leaning towards 1 day a week where submittals and issuance won't take place. But the office is open by appointment, so if someone wants to talk to a planner or a building official, they can still call and come in and work with those individuals. We just won't be issuing or accepting applications on those days, on that 1 day.
So just to clarify, but if someone calls with an appointment, then they could still submit an application?
Now, the idea would be to try to stay away from that. The idea would be you could still call by appointment and talk with a planner or talk with a building official about whatever your needs are, but that we wouldn't be issuing or taking in applications on any certain day. So we would have a day when we weren't really dealing with the financial ends of the front desk or the issuance part of that task.
And then for
So
over how long a period of time, like a year?
Well, what we've discussed is that, I definitely want to monitor it, and if there are complaints, if there are problems, everyone's aware that we'll have to readjust. But at this point, we are finding that, there are certain days that are just dead as far as, people coming up to the counter for those specific purposes. So we don't feel that it's going to be a big burden on anyone, but we're going to monitor it and see. We believe that the new software program, the design aspect of some of the tracking programs, get into a lot of minutia, and you need those administrative people to walk through all those steps in order to build the program correctly, and then the implementation of that, it could easily take a year to get used to. We are aware we're going into the building season, so we're just going to really keep track of it. But because of the demand diminishing, we were able to get rid of that front desk position and backfill with that. So we're just kind of asking back for some of that time back, but yet not filling that position. So we're trying to make that balance where we're keeping a pretty tight ship from a cost perspective.
Yes, Ron?
Is there any scenario where this might affect a applicant's deadline for something? And if so, can we somehow memorialize that they get an extra week because of the day that this might fall on regarding a vested right or something like that?
Well, if we're aware of that, we're certainly going to accommodate it, and make sure that that person gets their permit met, or that we look at it on Monday or instead of Friday or whatever it might have been. But there are a couple of those dates that might fall in, like growth management submittals have to be in a certain day. We're definitely going to accommodate all that type of,
Yes, Rich.
So just to follow up on George's comment, so someone would be able to call and set up an appointment, say, for a pre-submittal conference with the staff or other types of business.
And people are already pretty used to the system. We have certain times during the week where submittals are usually taken in, pre-submittals, excuse me. There's different hours for the advocates from each one of the disciplines to be at the front desk. So people are aware of the hours, and they've been posted, and it's been pretty successful.
So, Cindy, to summarize, you're saying that although you're going to reduce some time at the office, essentially, there is not going to be any reduction in service to our community members.
There will be a reduction of certain, we are going to be at the office. We will be there 5 days a week. There will be certain activities that wouldn't take place on certain days. And as far as we can tell, that will affect the issuance of building permits, the submittal of building permits, the issuance of planning applications, and any kind of recording process or any fees being taken in on whatever those hours are that we determine. But we will still be at the office 5 days a week. We'll just be busy. The people who man the front desk will be busy with trying to implement our software program.
But the goal is not to reduce services to the public. Is that right?
The goal is to make it as seamless as possible.
Yes. Okay. That's what I want to hear. Okay. Any other questions?
I guess my only comment is I'm a little concerned, but knowing that you'll monitor it closely, and if there was an emergency, if someone was not aware, that they would be able to be taken care of.
We'll put out flyers, and what we're doing, we have a whole kind of campaign, if you will, thought up where, we'll put the information on the web. We're going to have flyers and a sandwich board on our front desk to discuss things. We'll have takeaways with everybody's numbers. We already have that, but we'll make those even more available and upfront, where everybody will have everyone's individual numbers to be able to call for appointments. We also have a plan where any permits or applications that are coming in to date and any that are on the shelf that are to be picked up, we're making individual calls to those people to let them know that service won't be available on a certain date or certain dates from here on out. And so I think as I said, I think because we know who our customers are to a large extent, we're going to be able to make individualized contacts and let them know that. So.
And we'll continue to monitor.
Yeah.
If it's a really big impact, we're going to have to find another game plan.
And everyone's aware of that.
Okay, thank you, Cindy.
Thank you for understanding.
Interview of Corby Anderson. The board would like to discuss his appointment to the Translator Advisory Board.
Board?
We have 2 more interviews, and I don't know how many spots are available.
2, I think, of that page of your one alternate, one regular.
So maybe we should finish those out.
Yeah, because 2 more interviews.
Okay. Interesting issues come up, and I know we're putting together a briefing for you on the board appointment process, but issue came to our attention that I wanted to seek some guidance on, and it has to do with our board application process. And we request a resume, and just about everyone's been submitting. This last week, we actually had 2 applicants who withdrew their applications because of our resume requirement and the fact that we post the resumes on the internet as a public record. And I think the concerns range from having personal information as far as addresses and phone numbers that get posted on the web, that there's some concern among applicants about that. And there seems to be, as I wanted to open up a discussion with you guys to see, the attorney's office has determined that the items are public record unless the board makes a finding that the disclosure of that information is contrary to public interest. But there seems to maybe be another step that may be acceptable to the board, which is, do we need to really include, could we allow that personal information to be excluded from resumes and such for board applicants, or at least not made public? And so I don't know if there's any feeling that the attorney's office had suggested maybe we have a finding that it's not in the public interest to have that information as, or it's contrary to public interest, that's a public record. It seems to me we could also maybe go somewhere in the middle and just say, we don't need any of the personal information other than your name on the resume.
Yes, Rob, and then George.
I would just say, like a resume, you can include or exclude anything you want on your resume.
Yeah.
Period. And maybe state that it's going to be a public record.
Mm-hmm.
And they can choose not to put their phone number, their address, they can choose not to put one employment that they had.
Yeah.
We just won't have that in our decision-making process. They can choose just to give us our name. It's just they may not get the position. That's the way I would handle it.
George?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good idea. I was going to say, I don't think I need to know their mailing address, their email, their phone number. I would like to know a little bit about them in terms of the background or education, depending on what board they're applying for, that may be pertinent, and perhaps some history in terms of employment and community involvement. But it could be worded the way Rob says, the more information it's public information,
Feel free to exclude what you would like.
but knowing that you're applying for this board and there may be a certain amount of information that if you don't provide it, will probably be asked of you in a public setting.
Yes, Rachel.
I'm not sure I entirely understand the issue. Is it that they don't want past employers being bothered by emails or phone calls, or is it their actual email address?
I think as I've understood the issue, and I haven't talked to either of these applicants, so I'm getting this from staff right now. It seems like the concern has been personal contact information or addresses, and that could be because maybe their profession, they don't want that broadcast, if they are working in mental health or those kinds of areas.
Because, again, I see this as maybe a little different than you, Rob. I would see why, to say, well, we don't need the contact information. That's fine. But I would rather know what the past resume was, at some level. So I don't know if there's redacted information that could be posted online. Does it really need to be posted online? Does absolutely everything we do in the public realm end up then posted online? But if, I would be more interested in seeing a resume, but saying, look, if you don't want, your former employer in Texas reached by his personal email, don't include his personal email, but not to have a resume full of gaps that you don't know where they've been employed or what, interests they've potentially been pursuing or types of litigation they've been involved in or whatever.
I think what we could do I apologize, Jack.
Well, you finish and then I'll call on Jack.
I know, as I'm hearing the discussion, it's reasonable for us to put out a statement, just making folks aware, the information that you provide will be a public record, will be posted on the internet. If there's any information you do not want disclosed, contact information or what have you, please be aware of this and don't include it.
Jack?
Yeah, well, first of all, I'd say that each person's application is their own to fill out, and, sometimes we have one sentence, other times we have, like, Kobe, a book, past, etc. But to me, what I'm hearing is the issue is contact information. And I think they have to give, in an initial application, their address so we know they're Picken County. And they probably have to figure out some way for staff to communicate with them. But when it comes to be a public document, we can eliminate the contact info, the address, the phone number, and the email. And you go from there, because I agree, it's really not anyone's personal information. But the rest, they're trying to sell themselves, so if they happen to have a large resume or not much, that's what they choose. But I like background. But I think for the privacy concern, as we live in a complex world, leave it at that, we just eliminate a couple of those items, and I think I'm hearing we can do that. And that's a policy issue.
It's a public board, and quite frankly, I'm not comfortable with people who don't want to disclose information. I mean, it's just a hazard of being in public. So I'd rather leave it as a full disclosure. If they can't make full disclosure for whatever reason, then they can seek a position in some other capacity that doesn't seek that. But I think I just don't see why we would not do that.
We have current board members who don't disclose phone numbers or emails.
Or addresses.
Or addresses, well, the addresses, but they don't disclose their phone numbers or emails, and they're current board members or current committee members. So, and they probably do that because they don't want to get, barraged by who knows what's out there on the web. So, I'm still supportive of the ideas that you have given us as an idea.
Rachel?
Yeah, I think it's something that John really needs to drill down and talk to these two people to find out what was it about the resume. Is it their personal information or is it about past employers? Because I can see where if you had someone's private email or private cell phone number and of a past employer, not yours personally, you would feel awkward about disclosing that as information. That I can fully understand. On the other hand, I think Michael's right that, you may be taking actions on behalf of the public and that, whether they get a county email address that gets bounced to them or something, the public should have an opportunity to say, I'm really concerned about this, that, or the other thing. They are public officials once they've been appointed in some way, or public representatives. And so, it's important for someone to be able to say, how do I get a hold of so-and-so who's been appointed from my district to represent issues here, to tell them what my issues are. Does it have to be an email to the county building, and that's how these people get their emails, and it's relayed back? But I think it's more about drilling down to find out what it was that made them pull their resume. Was it because we, our board, were going to ask them about employment with a certain person 4 years ago, and they didn't want to have to disclose it? Then that's real important that we know what that was. That's what backgrounding is. If it was just that, I don't want to disclose someone else's, unlisted phone number, then I think they need to respect that as well. So, I need to know what it was about the resumes.
So, John, the direction is, I think, if the board agrees, is to go back and find out what the sensitive areas of an application for a public position were, and then we can address them more fully informed. Yes, Jack.
Yeah, so I've got to ask what current policy is. Say I, as a member of the public, call up and ask for somebody's personal phone number for open space. Do we give that? I don't know if, like the front desk, Charlotte has a list of people's contact numbers. I've called over to the city and asked for a cell phone, like Adams. And, she said, well, I'd only give it to you because I identified myself and they're a bit familiar with me.
I think the issue here is we have a written document and it is subject to open records, and unless you make a determination otherwise. And in addition to that, we are posting it on the web as part of our agenda packet. And my belief is that it is that step that is causing the concern about broadcasting and I think it has mostly to do with the personal contact information more than the professional history.
Yes.
And they haven't actually been appointed to a board. I mean,
Correct.
we don't even know. that
Yeah, they may not get
accepted,
it, yeah.
But that information is still out there. So I am sensitive to those concerns.
And so would you, I mean, we haven't, Michael's direction is reasonable, but we haven't, would you consider, or are you saying, Michael, a future conversation also when you get that information to find out what sparked this? Because I'm hearing what George and I at least are saying, that, we take out just a couple pieces of private information, because the rest ought to be public.
What we're asking John to do is go back to the applicants who were reluctant to put whatever information it was, whether it was the 10 years they spent in the Texas Penitentiary or their unlisted phone number, whatever that was, and come back to us and we'll have a further discussion.
Okay, so that's what it's for.
Yep. So George, I'm sorry, I'm way on one of those, because I think there are two topics here. One is the applicant, and two is how we handle the publication of information to our current board members, because that was raised too. Should someone who's on open space and trails have to have their information public for people to contact them? That's a different issue.
Currently they don't, so
There is no requirement for that.
Which is fine with
So
me.
they're contacted through the county if someone wanted to.
Merely addressing that there were two issues on the table here.
there's a contact email for the department, and they can address a letter to any individual person.
So last time I just wanted to follow up. Staff is working on follow-up from the retreat. We've created some teams with section leaders right now around each one of those 6 core areas to try and figure out some steps and such that we want to bring back to you in terms of an overall picture how we might proceed on those items this year. And so we're working on that. We're targeting to start pulling that plan together at the next section leader team meeting, which is next Wednesday, correct? And we'll come back to you in a work session after that to talk about follow-up and see if we're all on the same page.
Thank you.
And that's all I had for open discussion.
Any open discussion on the part of the board?
I would just put a small footnote out there again. I'm just not sure if I'll be at the meeting tomorrow night because of the dental work.
Okay. Shall we adjourn?
We shall.
Okay. Let's do that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you very much.
Happy Valentine's Day, everybody.
Yeah, it's Jacob.